The kiss that shattered Julian Wolfe's world wasn't meant for him, but he couldn't look away. Under the crystal chandeliers of Miami's most exclusive charity gala, Dominic Vale claimed Isabella Cruz's mouth with the kind of possession that rewrote power itself. 3 years ago, Julian had called her not enough and walked away without a backward glance. Tonight, watching the city's most dangerous man pull his ex-girlfriend close while 200 of Miami's elite held their breath, Julian finally understood what enough actually looked like. And it was so far beyond his reach, he might as well have been drowning. If you want to see how a woman transforms heartbreak into power and discovers that real strength doesn't beg for validation, it commands it, then stay with me until the end. And if this story speaks to you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Isabella's journey travels. Isabella Cruz had learned to read rooms the way others read books, quickly, thoroughly, and with an eye for the dangerous passages hidden between pretty words. The Fontainebleau's grand ballroom glittered with exactly the kind of wealth that once intimidated her. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors. Women moved through the crowd in gowns that cost more than most people's cars, their laughter practiced and their smiles sharp. Men in custom tuxedos gathered in clusters, trading influence like currency, their handshakes sealing deals worth millions before the appetizers even arrived. 3 years ago, Isabella would have felt like an imposter in a room like this. She would have second-guessed every word, every gesture, every breath. She would have made herself smaller, quieter, less, trying desperately to fit into spaces that were never designed for women like her. Women who grew up in little Havana apartments where the rent was always late and dreams were luxuries nobody could afford. Tonight, she felt nothing but calm. Her black gown was deceptively simple. Valentino, perfectly tailored, the kind of elegant that didn't scream for attention because it didn't need to. Her dark hair was swept up in a classic chignon that showed off the strong lines of her face and the confidence in her posture. Diamond earrings, a gift, though she'd never say from whom, caught the light when she moved her head. She looked exactly like what she'd become, a woman who belonged anywhere she chose to stand. "Ms. Cruz." A waiter appeared at her elbow with a tray of champagne flutes. "Compliments of Mr. Vale." Isabella took the glass with a slight smile, her fingers steady. Across the ballroom, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic, Dominic Vale stood in conversation with Miami's mayor and 2 city councilmen. Even from a distance, his presence commanded the space around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a black tux that probably cost more than some people's yearly salary, he looked every inch the successful businessman his public persona claimed. Only Isabella knew what existed beneath that polished surface. Only she understood that the power Dominic wielded had nothing to do with the legitimate real estate empire bearing his name, and everything to do with the intricate web of influence, loyalty, and calculated violence that controlled Miami's underworld from the shadows. Their eyes met across the crowd. Dominic's expression didn't change. He was too controlled for that. But something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, possession, promise. Isabella raised her champagne glass slightly, acknowledging him without words, then turned her attention back to the conversation she'd been navigating with the director of a prominent children's charity. This gala existed to raise money for underprivileged youth programs, and Isabella had spent the last 20 minutes strategically steering donations toward the organizations that would actually use the funds effectively rather than funneling them into administrative overhead. "Your perspective is fascinating," the director said, genuine interest warming her professional smile. "How did you develop such detailed knowledge of nonprofit financial structures?" "I did my research," Isabella replied smoothly, "and I grew up in neighborhoods where these programs make the difference between a kid finding opportunity or finding trouble. I take it personally when money gets wasted on good intentions instead of actual results. You should consider joining our advisory board. We could use someone with your say." "Isabella?" The voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk, smooth, cultured, and laced with the kind of surprise that carried an edge of something darker underneath. Isabella's spine stiffened. She knew that voice. She'd spent 2 years listening to it whisper promises that turned out to be lies, declarations that evaporated the moment they were tested, apologies that meant nothing when weighed against actions. She turned slowly, deliberately, giving herself those few seconds to lock every emotion behind the mask she'd perfected over 3 years of rebuilding herself from the ruins he'd left behind. Julian Wolfe stood 3 feet away, champagne glass in hand, his handsome face arranged in an expression of delighted shock that didn't quite reach his blue eyes. He looked exactly as she remembered, sandy hair styled with expensive product, perfect teeth, athletic build maintained by a personal trainer and a country club membership, a Rolex that probably cost $30,000 glinting on his wrist. He wore his privilege the way other men wore cologne, something so integral to his existence he'd stopped noticing it entirely. Julian. Isabella's voice was cool, polite, and completely disinterested. What a surprise! I heard you were working in Miami, but I never expected... He gestured vaguely at the gala, at her gown, at the champagne in her hand. This is quite the step up from that little office job you had in Atlanta. The subtle condescension in his tone was so familiar it almost made her laugh. Almost. People grow, Isabella said simply, though I suppose that concept might be foreign to you. Julian's smile tightened at the edges. Still sharp-tongued, I see. Some things never change. No, Isabella agreed. Isabella, some things don't. Like the fact that you still mistake confidence for arrogance, or the way you assume everyone around you exists on a lower tier simply because you've never bothered to look up from your own reflection long enough to notice them climbing past you. The charity director made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, then diplomatically excused herself, leaving Isabella and Julian in a bubble of tense privacy despite the crowd surrounding them. Julian's expression hardened slightly, the mask of pleasant surprise cracking just enough to show the entitled irritation beneath. That's harsh, even for you. I thought we parted on relatively good terms. You thought wrong. Isabella took a slow sip of champagne, her gaze steady on his face. You told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for your world, that I embarrassed you in front of your colleagues with my background, my accent, my lack of proper education. You said I was holding you back from the life you deserved. I was young and stupid. You were 28, old enough to know better, old enough to be honest instead of cruel. Isabella's voice remained calm, almost conversational, which made the words cut deeper. But I should thank you, really. Breaking me taught me an important lesson about the difference between a man who wants a woman who makes him look good and a man who actually sees her value. And you found that here? Julian's gaze swept dismissively over the ballroom. In Miami, playing dress-up at charity galas and pretending to be something you're not? I'm not pretending anything, Isabella said quietly. I'm exactly who I've always been. The difference is, I stopped letting men like you convince me that wasn't enough. Julian opened his mouth to respond, but his attention suddenly shifted to something over Isabella's shoulder. His face went carefully blank, the way people's expressions did when they were trying very hard not to show fear. Isabella. The voice was low, warm, and carried the kind of quiet authority that made everyone within earshot instinctively straighten their posture. Isabella turned to find Dominic Vale standing directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the subtle cedar and leather of his cologne. His dark eyes were fixed on Julian with the kind of focus a predator gives prey, patient, assessing, already certain of the outcome. Dominic, Isabella's voice softened automatically, something she couldn't quite control even after months of trying. I was just catching up with an old acquaintance. I can see that. Dominic's gaze never left Julian's face, though from what I overheard, the conversation seemed to be making you uncomfortable. I'm perfectly fine, Isabella assured him, though warmth spread through her chest at the protective edge in his tone. Nevertheless, Dominic extended his hand toward Julian, the gesture polite and utterly commanding at the same time. Dominic Vale, I don't believe we've been introduced. Julian hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for everyone present to notice, before accepting the handshake. Julian Wolfe, Atlanta. I'm in commercial real estate development. Wolfe. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. The Wolfe family. Old money, primarily focused on retail properties and suburban developments. Your father recently lost the bid on that downtown Atlanta renovation project to a smaller firm. That must have been disappointing. Julian's smile became strained. You keep tabs on Atlanta real estate? I keep tabs on everything that might be relevant to my interests, Dominic replied smoothly. And Isabella is very relevant to my interests. The possessiveness in that statement landed like a physical thing. Julian's gaze darted between Dominic and Isabella, calculation and something that looked uncomfortably like jealousy warring behind his eyes. I see, Julian said slowly. And how exactly do you two know each other? Isabella is my executive assistant, Dominic said, which was technically true. Her official title handled all his legitimate business operations. She runs my entire schedule, manages my properties, coordinates with my legal team, and generally keeps my life functioning smoothly. I don't make a single major decision without her input. What he didn't say, what only Isabella knew, was that she also sat in on meetings with men whose names never appeared in public records, translated the coded language of criminal enterprises into actionable intelligence, and helped Dominic navigate the treacherous politics of an underworld where one wrong move could start a war that would paint Miami's streets red. That's quite a responsibility, Julian said, his tone suggesting it was anything but impressive. I'm sure it keeps you very busy, Isabella. All that scheduling and property management. The dismissiveness in his voice was so blatant it was almost funny. He genuinely couldn't conceive that Isabella might be anything more than a glorified secretary, someone who kept calendars and answered phones while the real power players, the men, made actual decisions. Dominic's expression didn't change, but the temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. I'm sure your own assistant is equally valuable, Dominic said quietly. Though I imagine the skill set required to manage retail lease agreements is somewhat different from the expertise needed to coordinate international property acquisitions, negotiate with foreign investors, and maintain relationships with the kind of clients who expect discretion along with efficiency. Julian's jaw tightened. I manage my own affairs. How exhausting that must be. Dominic's tone was perfectly pleasant, which somehow made the words more cutting. Isabella, the mayor wants to speak with us about that youth center proposal. Shall we? It wasn't really a question. Isabella recognized the dismissal for what it was, Dominic removing her from a conversation he deemed unworthy of her time. Part of her wanted to bristle at the high-handedness of it. Another part, the part that remembered exactly how Julian's condescension used to make her feel small and stupid and never quite good enough, appreciated having someone intervene on her behalf for once. Of course. Isabella turned to Julian with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was enlightening to see you again, Julian. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. She started to walk away, Dominic's hand settling possessively on the small of her back, when Julian's voice stopped her. Isabella, wait. She turned back, one eyebrow raised in cool inquiry. Julian's expression had shifted into something that might have been regret if it wasn't so thoroughly mixed with wounded pride. I just wanted to say, you look good, really good. Success suits you. Success suits everyone, Isabella replied calmly. The difference is some of us have to earn it instead of inheriting it. Good night, Julian. This time, when she walked away, she didn't look back. Dominic guided her through the crowd with the kind of effortless authority that parted clusters of people without him saying a word. His hand never left the small of her back, the touch warm and grounding through the fabric of her gown. Old boyfriend? He asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Ancient history, Isabella confirmed. From when I was young and stupid enough to believe that love meant making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Dominic's fingers tightened slightly against her spine, a flash of something dark crossing his features. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. He taught me, Isabella corrected. There's a difference. Pain can be instructive if you let it make you stronger instead of bitter. And did it? Make you stronger? Isabella thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, desperate to please, constantly apologizing for existing, convinced that Julian's world was the only one worth entering even if it meant erasing everything that made her who she was. She thought about the long, brutal months after he'd ended things, when she'd had to rebuild her sense of self from the ground up, learning to value her own judgment over anyone else's opinion. Yes, she said simply. It made me strong enough to recognize real power when I saw it. strong enough to stand beside you without flinching. Dominic's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the hard edges of his features easing into something warmer. You've never flinched, not once, even when you probably should have. Should I have? Isabella looked up at him, genuine curiosity in her tone. Flinched, I mean? Most people do. When they realize what I really am, what I really do, they either run or they start walking on eggshells, terrified of saying the wrong thing or seeing too much. Dominic's dark eyes searched her face. You just accepted it, adapted, started asking questions about how to be useful instead of how to get away. Getting away from you never seemed like the smart play, Isabella admitted. And besides, I grew up around violence and desperation and people doing terrible things because they were backed into corners. Your world isn't that different from mine. It's just operating at a higher tax bracket. That's a very pragmatic way of viewing organized crime. Is there another way to view it? Isabella's lips curved slightly. You're a businessman, Dominic. You just operate in markets where contracts can't be enforced by lawyers and disputes get settled with different tools. The fundamentals are the same: supply, demand, leverage, and consequences. Dominic studied her for a long moment, something like admiration warming his expression. How did he ever let you go? He didn't know what he had, Isabella said simply. He saw a girl from the wrong side of town who waitressed her way through community college and never learned which fork to use at formal dinners. He never bothered looking deeper than that. His loss? My gain. Isabella smiled up at him. If Julian hadn't broken me, I never would have left Atlanta, never would have come to Miami, never would have walked into your office looking for a job and ended up finding something I didn't even know I needed. And what's that? Someone who sees me, Isabella said quietly. All of me. The sharp edges and the soft centers and everything in between. Someone who doesn't need me to be less so he can be more. Dominic's hand moved from her back to her waist, pulling her subtly closer as they navigated through the crowd. I need you to be exactly what you are. Smart, capable, ruthless when necessary, and kind when it matters. I need you to challenge me when I'm wrong and support me when I'm right and tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. That's a lot of needs for someone who claims to be completely self-sufficient. I never claimed that. Other people assumed it because I don't show weakness. Dominic's voice dropped lower, intimate despite the crowd around them. But you've seen me weak, Isabella. You've seen me doubt myself, second-guess decisions, struggle with the weight of every choice that could get people killed. You've seen all of it, and you're still here. Where else would I be? With someone safer, someone whose past doesn't include bodies and blood money and the kind of sins that don't wash clean, no matter how many legitimate businesses I build? Isabella stopped walking, forcing Dominic to stop with her. They stood near the edge of the dance floor where couples swayed to the orchestra's rendition of something classical and romantic. She looked up at him, her dark eyes serious. I don't want safe, she said clearly. I want real. I want someone who trusts me with the truth instead of feeding me comfortable lies. I want partnership, not protection. And I want you, exactly as you are, blood and all. Dominic's expression went very still, the way it did when he was feeling something too big to show publicly. You destroy me sometimes. You know that? Good, Isabella said softly. You destroyed me first. Now we're even. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile but was close. Dance with me. Here? In front of everyone? Especially in front of everyone. Dominic's gaze flicked toward the bar where Julian stood watching them with barely concealed intensity. Let him see exactly what he lost. Isabella's pulse quickened. There was something dangerous in Dominic's tone, something possessive and territorial that should probably concern her but instead sent heat spreading through her veins. You want to prove a point, she said. I want to claim what's mine, Dominic corrected. There's a difference. I'm not property. No, you're infinitely more valuable than property. Dominic extended his hand, palm up, waiting for her choice. You're the person I trust with my life, my empire, and my darkest secrets. You're the woman who stands beside me in rooms full of killers and never shows fear. You're Isabella Cruz, and you belong to yourself first. But when you choose to stand beside me, I want everyone in this room to know exactly what that means. Isabella's breath caught. She could walk away. Should probably walk away. This was dangerous territory, letting Dominic stake a claim in front of Miami's elite and whoever else was watching. It would change things, shift perceptions, mark her as his in ways that couldn't be undone. But when had she ever chosen the safe path? Isabella placed her hand in Dominic's, feeling his fingers close around hers with the kind of careful strength that could break bones or cherish skin depending on his intent. "Then let's make sure they understand," she said. Dominic's smile was slow, dangerous, and entirely satisfied. He led her onto the dance floor as the orchestra transitioned into something slower, more intimate. Other couples made space for them automatically, the crowd partying the way it always did for Dominic Vale, less out of respect and more out of self-preservation instinct. His hand settled on her waist, warm and possessive. Her palm rested against his shoulder, feeling the solid muscle beneath expensive fabric. They fell into rhythm easily, bodies moving together with the kind of synchronicity that came from months of learning each other's patterns, anticipating movements, existing in the same dangerous spaces. "You're tense," Dominic murmured, his lips close to her ear. "I can feel him watching." "Good. Let him watch." Dominic's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her closer until there was no polite distance left between them. Let him see what he threw away. Let him understand that the woman he called not enough is worth more than his entire inherited fortune and empty pedigree combined. "This isn't about revenge," Isabella said, though her pulse was racing. "No," Dominic agreed. "It's about truth. About showing him, showing everyone, exactly where you stand. Not behind me, not beneath me, beside me, as my equal in every way that matters." Isabella's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't quite name. Julian had never spoken to her like this, had never acknowledged her as anything more than an accessory to his life, something pretty to display at functions and then dismiss when real business needed discussing. "Dominic, I'm going to kiss you," he said quietly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Right here, in front of 200 people, in front of him. I need you to understand that before it happens. This isn't strategy or manipulation or some kind of performance. When I kiss you, it's because I want to, because I've wanted to for months, because I'm tired of pretending that what we have is purely professional when we both know it stopped being just business the moment you looked at me with those sharp eyes and refused to be intimidated." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "And if I say no, then we finish this dance, I take you home, and we never speak of it again." Dominic's expression was utterly serious. "I would never force this, Isabella. You have all the power here, not me." She should say no, should maintain the careful boundaries they'd established, keep things professional, even though they'd stopped being professional months ago, when late nights working in his office had turned into conversations that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with understanding each other's scars. But Isabella Cruz had spent 3 years learning that the safe choice and the right choice weren't always the same thing. "Yes," she whispered. Dominic's eyes flared with something fierce and possessive. "Yes? Kiss me. Show them. Show him." Isabella's voice grew stronger. "Show everyone that I chose you, not because you're powerful or dangerous or wealthy, but because you see me. Really see me. And that's worth more than anything Julian Wolf's family money could ever buy." Dominic's hand moved from her waist to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The orchestra swelled around them. Conversations died as people noticed them stopping in the middle of the dance floor, Dominic Vale holding Isabella Cruz like she was something infinitely precious and infinitely dangerous at the same time. "Let him watch," Dominic said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let them all watch." Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was claiming and possessive and absolutely deliberate, the kind of kiss that announced ownership and partnership and something far deeper than either word could adequately describe. Dominic's hand tangled in her hair, destroying her careful chignon as he angled her head to deepen the kiss. Isabella's fingers dug into his shoulders, her body melting against his as she kissed him back with equal intensity. The ballroom disappeared. The crowd faded into irrelevance. There was nothing but Dominic's mouth on hers, his hand in her hair, his arm around her waist, holding her against him like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. When they finally broke apart, Isabella was breathing hard, her lips swollen, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. Dominic looked equally wrecked, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Everyone's staring," Isabella managed, her voice rough. "Let them stare." Dominic's thumb traced her lower lip, his expression utterly satisfied. "Let them understand exactly what they're looking at. Let him understand that you're not the woman he discarded. You're the woman who chose someone who actually deserves you." Isabella glanced over Dominic's shoulder toward the bar where Julian had been standing. He was still there, his face pale, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and something that looked uncomfortably like grief. "Good." Something dark and satisfied whispered in Isabella's chest. "Let him hurt the way I hurt. Let him understand what he threw away." But even as she thought it, Isabella realized the truth. This wasn't about Julian anymore. Wasn't about revenge or proving anything or making him regret his choices. This was about her and Dominic and the dangerous, complicated thing growing between them that had nothing to do with anyone else. "Take me home," Isabella said quietly, her eyes meeting Dominic's. His expression grew very still. "Isabella, not for that. Not yet." She touched his face gently, her fingers tracing his strong jaw. "But I want to be somewhere private. Somewhere we can talk about what just happened without 200 people analyzing every word and gesture." Dominic nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his dark eyes. "My car is waiting outside." They left the ballroom together, Dominic's hand never leaving the small of her back. As they passed the bar, Julian took a step forward, his mouth opening like he was going to say something. Isabella met his eyes calmly, feeling nothing but closure. "Goodbye, Julian," she said simply. Then she walked out of his life for the second and final time, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, behind her. The drive to Dominic's penthouse was silent, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence that needed filling with meaningless words. Isabella sat in the back of the Mercedes, watching Miami's glittering skyline slide past the tinted windows while Dominic's hand rested on her knee, possessive, grounding, real. His driver, Marcus, knew better than to make conversation. The partition stayed up, giving them privacy even though neither of them spoke. Isabella could feel the tension radiating from Dominic's body, the careful control he was exerting over whatever was happening beneath that composed exterior. When they reached his building, a sleek glass tower overlooking Biscayne Bay, where the penthouse occupied the entire top floor, Dominic helped her out of the car with the same careful attention he'd shown all evening. His hand found the small of her back again as they crossed the marble lobby, the night security guard nodding respectfully without making eye contact. The private elevator required a key card. Dominic swiped his, and the doors closed around them, sealing them into a quiet space where the pretense could finally drop. "Are you angry with me?" Dominic asked quietly, his reflection visible in the polished steel doors. Isabella turned to look at him directly instead of through the mirror. "Why would I be angry? I kissed you in front of Miami's elite without asking permission first. I staked a claim publicly that we'd never discuss privately. I used you to make a point to a man who hurt you." Dominic's jaw tightened. Any of those would be valid reasons for anger. "You asked if you could kiss me," Isabella reminded him. "I said yes." "That's called consent, not ownership." "The kiss itself, yes. But the context," Dominic ran a hand through his dark hair, disrupting its perfect style. "I wanted him to see. Wanted everyone to see. That's not about you. That's about my ego, and my possessiveness, and my need to mark territory like some kind of territorial animal." Isabella studied him for a long moment, seeing the genuine concern beneath his careful words. Julian would have justified his actions, found ways to make his behavior seem reasonable or even romantic. Dominic was doing the opposite, holding himself accountable for impulses he wasn't sure he had the right to feel. "What if I wanted them to see too?" she asked softly. Dominic's gaze snapped to hers, dark eyes searching her face. Did you? Part of me did, Isabella admitted. The part that spent 2 years with Julian feeling invisible, interchangeable, like I could be replaced by any woman who knew which designer labels to wear and which country clubs to join. The part that wants him to know exactly what he lost. She stepped closer to Dominic, close enough to feel his heat. But mostly, I wanted you to kiss me because I've been thinking about it for months, and I was tired of pretending I hadn't. The elevator chimed softly, doors opening onto the penthouse's private foyer. Dominic didn't move immediately, his attention completely focused on Isabella. Months, he repeated. At least 4, Isabella confirmed. Maybe longer. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when "my boss is attractive" became "I can't stop thinking about what his mouth would feel like on mine." A slow smile curved Dominic's lips, genuine amusement mixing with something darker and far more dangerous. And here I thought I was hiding it so well. Hiding what? The fact that every time you walk into my office, I have to remind myself that you work for me and deserve to be treated with professional respect instead of being backed against my desk and thoroughly compromised. Heat flooded Isabella's body at the image his words created. That's a very specific fantasy. I have others. Dominic stepped out of the elevator, turning to extend his hand. Would you like to hear them? Isabella's pulse hammered as she placed her hand in his. Maybe you should show me instead. Dominic's eyes flared with heat, but he didn't pull her close the way she half expected. Instead, he led her through the foyer and into the main living space, a sprawling open-plan area with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a breathtaking view of Miami's coastline. The decor was masculine but not cold, all clean lines and expensive materials that managed to feel lived in rather than staged. Drink? Dominic asked, moving toward the bar area with the same fluid grace he brought to everything. Whiskey. Neat. He poured 2 glasses of what was probably ridiculously expensive scotch and handed her one, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. To honest conversations. Isabella clinked her glass against his. To knowing what we want and being brave enough to say it out loud. They drank in companionable silence, Isabella wandering toward the windows while Dominic watched her with the patient attention of a man who'd learned that the best predators waited for the right moment rather than forcing action prematurely. You grew up in Little Havana, Dominic said after a moment, his voice quiet but carrying easily in the open space. Father left when you were 7. Mother worked 3 jobs to keep you housed and fed. You put yourself through community college, waiting tables and bartending, graduated with honors despite having no financial support or family connections. Moved to Atlanta chasing a job opportunity that paid barely above minimum wage but promised room for advancement. Isabella turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. You've done your research. I research everyone who works for me, especially when they're handling information that could destroy me if it fell into the wrong hands. Dominic's expression was serious, but with you, I kept digging deeper. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to understand. Wanted to know what made you so resilient, so capable of adapting to impossible situations without breaking. And what did you find? A woman who learned early that survival meant being smarter, faster, and more strategic than everyone around her. A woman who understands power dynamics because she's been navigating them since childhood. A woman who doesn't flinch from darkness because she's seen plenty of it already. Dominic set his glass down, his gaze intense. A woman who could have chosen safety 100 times but keeps choosing strength instead. Isabella's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. You make me sound far more impressive than I am. I make you sound exactly as impressive as you are. You just don't see it because you're too busy proving yourself to notice you've already succeeded. Succeeded at what? Becoming exactly who you wanted to be. But Dominic crossed the space between them slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. You told me once that Julian made you feel like you needed to erase yourself to deserve love. Has it occurred to you that you've spent the last 3 years doing the opposite? Building yourself stronger, sharper, more capable, not to prove anything to him, but to prove something to yourself. Isabella looked up at him, her heart beating hard against her ribs. What am I trying to prove? That you were always enough. That his inability to see your value was his failure, not yours. That the woman you've become didn't need his world or his approval or his family name to matter. Dominic's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. You've proven it, Isabella. You proved it months ago. You can stop running now. I'm not running. Aren't you? Dominic's thumb brushed her cheekbone. You let me kiss you in front of 200 people, but the moment we're alone, you're across the room from me, looking like you might bolt for the door any second. That's not confidence. That's fear. I'm not afraid of you. No, you're afraid of this. Dominic gestured between them, of what happens if we stop pretending this is just professional convenience and admit that somewhere along the way, it became something far more complicated. Isabella wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right. She'd spent months carefully maintaining boundaries, telling herself that what she felt for Dominic was respect and attraction and professional admiration, but nothing deeper. Nothing that could hurt her the way Julian had. What if it doesn't work? She asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been circling her thoughts since the moment Dominic's lips touched hers on that dance floor. What if we try this and it falls apart and I lose everything I've built here? My job, my life, my... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Your what? Dominic prompted gently. My friend, Isabella admitted, the word feeling inadequate for what Dominic had become to her. The person I trust most in the world. The man who knows every ugly truth about me and hasn't walked away. Dominic's expression softened into something that looked almost like pain. Isabella, I have orchestrated the disappearance of people who threatened my interests. I have made decisions that resulted in violence and death. I have built an empire on fear and loyalty, and the understanding that crossing me comes with consequences most people can't imagine. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. And despite all of that, despite knowing exactly what I am and what I'm capable of, you're worried that I'm the one who's going to walk away from you? You have options, Isabella said. Women who come from the right families, who understand your world from birth, who can navigate these social circles without learning everything from scratch. I don't want options. Dominic's voice was firm, almost harsh. I want you. Specifically, uniquely, exclusively you. The woman who told me I was wrong about a business strategy and was proven right. The woman who sits in meetings with men who have killed people and never shows an ounce of fear. The woman who remembers my coffee order and my mother's birthday, and which associates can be trusted versus which ones need watching. His forehead touched hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. You think you're the only one afraid of losing something irreplaceable? I'm terrified that you're going to realize you could have a normal life with a normal man who doesn't come with a body count and constant danger and enemies who would use you to hurt me the second they understood how much you matter. Isabella's hands came up to grip his wrists, holding him in place. I don't want normal. I tried normal with Julian and it nearly destroyed me because normal meant making myself smaller and quieter and less threatening to his ego. You've never asked me to be less than I am. I wouldn't dare. You'd eviscerate me. A surprised laugh escaped Isabella's throat. Probably. Definitely. Dominic's lips curved into a slight smile. You're vicious when someone underestimates you. I've watched you dismantle grown men with nothing but carefully chosen words and perfect timing. I learned from the best. Your mother? You, Isabella corrected. You taught me that real power doesn't announce itself with volume or violence. It's in the pause before you speak, the choice of where to apply pressure, the understanding that sometimes the most devastating move is the one nobody sees coming. Dominic's eyes darkened with something that wasn't quite desire but was definitely related. You're going to ruin me, aren't you? Probably, Isabella said, again, echoing his earlier assessment. Is that a problem? Only if you plan to leave after. The question hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't quite saying out loud. Isabella thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, so desperate for Julian's approval she'd twisted herself into shapes that didn't fit her bones. She thought about the woman she'd become, sharp and capable and comfortable with power in all its forms. She thought about Dominic, who'd given her responsibility and trust and space to prove herself without ever demanding she be anything other than exactly who she was. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly, unless you want me to. Never. The word was immediate, fierce, completely certain. I would burn Miami to the ground before I let you walk out of my life. That's dramatic. That's honest. Dominic's hands slid from her face to her shoulders. His touch warmed through the fabric of her gown. I don't do anything halfway, Isabella. Not business, not loyalty, and definitely not this. If we do this, if we stop pretending and acknowledge what's been building between us for months, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. Tell me, Isabella said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm possessive, territorial. I don't share things I consider mine, and I would consider you mine in every way that matters. Dominic's gaze held hers with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead sent heat pooling low in her belly. I would protect you, prioritize you, give you anything you asked for and probably things you didn't. But I would also expect complete honesty, absolute loyalty, and your presence in parts of my life that most people never see. The darkness doesn't go away just because we're together. It gets deeper, more complicated, infinitely more dangerous. I already see those parts, Isabella pointed out. I sit in on your meetings. I know your business. I understand exactly what you do and how you do it. Knowing and living with it are different things. Right now, you go home to your apartment every night. You have separation, distance, the ability to step away from my world when you need to breathe. Dominic's expression was utterly serious. If we do this, that separation disappears. You become a target, a potential weakness, someone my enemies would use against me without hesitation. Your life gets infinitely more complicated and dangerous, and I can't promise to always protect you from the consequences of standing beside me. Isabella considered his words carefully, understanding that this was Dominic giving her an honest picture instead of painting pretty promises he couldn't keep. Julian had offered her a fantasy, the perfect relationship, the ideal future, all wrapped up in lies that evaporated the moment reality intruded. Dominic was offering her truth, complicated, dangerous, real truth that came with no guarantees except his commitment to face it together. I've been a target before, Isabella said slowly. Do you remember that situation with the Volkov brothers 3 months ago? Dominic's expression went very still, his jaw tightening. When they tried to use you to get leverage over me. Yes, I remember. You had Marcus pull me out of my apartment at 2 a.m. and put me in a safe house for 3 days while you handled the situation. Isabella's fingers traced the lapel of Dominic's jacket, feeling the expensive fabric and the solid warmth of the man beneath it. You could have just let them take me, used it as an opportunity to lure them out into the open, but you didn't. You're not bait, Isabella. You're not expendable. Dominic stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. What am I? Isabella prompted gently. Everything. The word came out rough, almost angry. You're everything I didn't know I needed until you walked into my office 8 months ago with a resume that barely qualified you for the position and enough confidence to demand the salary you deserved anyway. Isabella smiled at the memory. You told me I was overvaluing myself. I was testing you, seeing if you'd back down or hold your ground. Dominic's hands tightened on her shoulders. You didn't even blink. Just pulled out a detailed breakdown of comparable positions and market rates and explained exactly why you were worth every penny you were asking for. And you hired me on the spot. I hired you because I recognized someone who understood their own value and wasn't afraid to fight for it. I kept you because you were brilliant. I started falling for you because somewhere between managing my calendar and coordinating with my attorneys and sitting in meetings where most people would be terrified, you became the person I trusted most in the world. Dominic's forehead touched hers again, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. And I'm completely in love with you, because even knowing everything I am and everything I've done, you still look at me like I'm worth saving. Isabella's breath caught, her entire world narrowing to those words and the man speaking them. Dominic, you don't have to say it back, he said quickly. I'm not trying to pressure you or force some kind of declaration. I just need you to understand what this is for me. This isn't casual. This isn't convenient. This is me telling you that you've become essential to my existence in ways I didn't think were possible. Isabella's hands moved from his lapels to cup his face, feeling the slight stubble along his jaw, the tension in his features, the vulnerability in his eyes that he probably showed no one else. "You're an idiot," Dominic blinked. "What?" "If you think I've been working 18-hour days and sitting in rooms with killers and learning the intricacies of your empire just for a paycheck, you're an idiot." Isabella's smile was soft, genuine, completely unguarded. "I've been in love with you for months, Dominic. Probably since that night you stayed up until 3 in the morning helping me prepare for my citizenship exam, even though you had a meeting with the Hernandez cartel at dawn." "You were nervous," Dominic said, his expression shifting into something warm and almost shy. "You kept second-guessing your English even though you speak it perfectly. I just wanted to help." "You made flashcards. You, Dominic Vale, who controls half of Miami's underground economy, made flashcards with American history facts and immigration questions." Isabella laughed softly. "That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. Flashcards are effective study tools. Flashcards are adorable. You're adorable when you're trying to be helpful." Isabella stroked her thumbs along his cheekbones. "You're also terrifying and dangerous and absolutely lethal when you need to be. But with me, you're careful, gentle. You ask before you take and you give without expecting anything in return, and you make me feel like I matter in ways that have nothing to do with how useful I am to your organization." Dominic's hand slid down her arms, along her waist, pulling her flush against him until there was no space left between their bodies. "You matter more than the organization, more than my reputation, my money, my power, all of it. If I had to choose between my empire and you, I'd burn everything I've built and start over with nothing as long as you were standing beside me." "That's a dangerous thing to admit." "Only if it gets used against me. Are you planning to use it against me, Isabella?" "No," she said simply. "I'm planning to keep it safe. Guard it the way you guard everything I've told you about Julian, about my past, about every fear and insecurity I've spent years trying to hide." Her lips curved. "We're going to protect each other's weaknesses, remember? That's what partners do." "Partners," Dominic repeated, tasting the word. "I like that. Much better than boss and assistant or criminal and accomplice." "We can be all of those things," Isabella said. "We're complicated people living complicated lives. We don't have to fit into neat categories." "No," Dominic agreed. "We really don't." He kissed her then, and this kiss was different from the one on the dance floor. That had been claiming, possessive, meant for public consumption. This was private, intimate, slow and thorough, and devastating in its honesty. Dominic kissed her like he was memorizing her, learning every response, cataloging what made her sigh and what made her grip his shoulders harder. Isabella kissed him back with equal intensity, months of restraint and careful professionalism dissolving under the reality of finally touching him the way she'd wanted to for so long. His hands moved over her body with the same careful attention he brought to everything, learning her curves, testing her responses, always paying attention to what made her breath catch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic's eyes were nearly black with desire. "I need to know your boundaries," he said, his voice rough with want, but his words utterly controlled. "Tell me what you want and what you don't. What scares you and what excites you. I need to know everything so I don't cross lines I can't uncross." Isabella appreciated that more than he probably knew. The fact that even while clearly wanting her, Dominic was still thinking about her comfort, her consent, her agency in determining what happened next. "I want honesty," she said carefully, organizing her thoughts. "Complete transparency about your business, your decisions, your concerns. No protecting me from difficult truths because you think I can't handle them." "Agreed." "I want partnership, real partnership, where my input matters and my opinions are valued and I'm treated as an equal even when we disagree." Isabella's gaze held his. "I won't be decorative, Dominic. I won't be the pretty thing you show off at galas and then dismiss when real decisions need making." "You've never been decorative. You're lethal." Dominic's smile was genuine. "And I value your opinion more than almost anyone's. You see angles I miss, catch details I overlook. I need that perspective, especially when I'm too close to a situation to be objective. I want safety, but not at the cost of my freedom. I won't be locked away in a gilded cage while you handle everything dangerous." Isabella's tone firmed. "If we're doing this, I'm in it completely. The risks, the danger, all of it. Don't shut me out to protect me. That's going to be difficult for me, Dominic admitted. My instinct is to keep you away from anything that could hurt you. Then we'll compromise. You can increase security, assign protection, do whatever makes you feel better about the risks, but you don't get to decide unilaterally what I can and can't handle. Isabella touched his face gently. Trust me to know my own limits, and I'll trust you to keep me safe when I reach them. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with protective instincts that probably ran bone deep. Finally, he nodded. I can work with that, but I reserve the right to argue with you when I think you're being reckless. As long as you understand that arguing doesn't mean deciding for me. Understood. Dominic's hand settled on her waist, his touch warm through the fabric of her gown. What else? I want time. Not to decide if I want this, I already know I do. But time to adjust, to figure out how we navigate being together while still working together without it becoming a disaster. Isabella's smile was wry. I have no idea how to date my boss, who also happens to be Miami's most powerful crime lord. We'll figure it out together, Dominic assured her. And for what it's worth, I have no idea how to date someone who knows all my secrets and hasn't run screaming. We're both navigating new territory. Then we'll make mistakes. Probably catastrophic ones, Dominic agreed cheerfully, but we'll fix them together. That's what partners do, right? Isabella laughed, tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally releasing. Right. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, the Miami skyline glittering beyond the windows, the future stretching out before them uncertain and dangerous and somehow exactly right. I should probably go home, Isabella said eventually, though she made no move to step away from Dominic's embrace. It's late, and we both have meetings tomorrow. You could stay. Dominic's voice was carefully neutral, giving her space to refuse without pressure. Guest room, completely separate, no expectations. I'd like to know you're here, safe, with me. Isabella understood what he wasn't saying, that tonight had shifted something fundamental between them, and Dominic wasn't quite ready to let her disappear back into her separate life just yet. That he needed the tangible reminder that this was real, that she'd chosen him, that tomorrow wouldn't reveal this was all some kind of wishful hallucination. Okay, she said simply. I'll stay. Dominic's expression shifted into something that looked almost like relief. I'll get you something to sleep in. He disappeared down a hallway, giving Isabella a moment alone with her thoughts. She wandered to the windows, looking out at the city she'd made her home, the life she'd built from nothing, the future she was choosing with eyes wide open to all its complications. 3 years ago, Julian had broken her heart and convinced her she wasn't enough for his world. Tonight, she'd watched him realize that she'd become far more than he'd ever imagined possible, and she'd done it without him, despite him, in defiance of every limitation he'd tried to place on her potential. But this wasn't really about Julian anymore. Maybe it never had been. Maybe his rejection had just been the catalyst she'd needed to finally start building the life she actually wanted, instead of the one she thought she was supposed to want. Here. Dominic reappeared with a t-shirt that would probably fall to her knees and a pair of sleep pants with a drawstring waist. Guest bathroom is through there. Take whatever time you need. Isabella accepted the clothes, her fingers brushing his deliberately. Thank you. For tonight. For being honest about what this is and what it means. For not making me guess or play games or wonder where I stand. You stand beside me, Dominic said simply. That's the only place I want you. Isabella smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. I can work with that. She changed in the guest bathroom, washing off the evening's makeup and letting down what remained of her destroyed chignon. Her reflection looked different somehow, softer around the edges, less defended, like some barrier she'd been maintaining for years had finally crumbled. When she emerged, Dominic had changed too, trading his tuxedo for sleep pants and a t-shirt that showed off the lean muscle of his arms and shoulders. He dimmed the lights and was standing by the windows, illuminated by the city glow. Guest room is down the hall, he said without turning around. First door on the right, but if you want company, completely platonic company, I'll be out here for a while. Sometimes I can't sleep after events like this. Too much adrenaline. Isabella recognized the offer for what it was. Dominic giving her space while simultaneously letting her know she didn't have to take it if she didn't want to. She made her choice. Instead of heading for the guest room, Isabella crossed to where Dominic stood and settled beside him, close enough that their arms touched. Neither of them spoke. They just stood together, watching Miami glitter and breathe and live, two people who'd found something unexpected and dangerous and absolutely real in the middle of complicated lives. Dominic's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers interlacing with the same easy synchronicity their bodies had found on the dance floor. Isabella squeezed gently, feeling him squeeze back, the silent communication worth more than 1,000 words. They'd figure out the details tomorrow, how to navigate work and relationship, public and private, professional boundaries and personal desires. Tonight, this was enough. Standing together, hands linked, future uncertain, but facing it together. Isabella Cruz had learned a long time ago that the best revenge wasn't making someone regret losing you. It was building a life so full and rich and genuine that you forgot they existed at all. As she stood beside Dominic Vale, watching their city shimmer in the darkness, Julian Wolfe barely crossed her mind at all. Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere nearby. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the previous night came rushing back in vivid detail. The gala. Julian's face when Dominic kissed her. The conversation that had stripped away months of careful pretense and left nothing but raw honesty between them. She sat up slowly, finding herself in the guest room, though she had no memory of getting there. The last thing she remembered was standing beside Dominic at the windows, their hands linked, watching the city breathe. She must have fallen asleep on the couch at some point, and he'd carried her here without waking her. The thought made something warm unfurl in her chest. Dominic taking care of her even when she wasn't conscious to appreciate it, respecting her space by putting her in the guest room instead of his bed, despite everything they'd acknowledged between them. Isabella found her gown from last night draped carefully over a chair, her shoes placed neatly beside it. Someone, Dominic obviously, had also left a pair of jeans and a soft cashmere sweater on the dresser, both with tags still attached and surprisingly close to her size. She showered quickly in the guest bathroom, then dressed in the borrowed clothes, finding them fitting perfectly enough to make her wonder if Dominic had been paying closer attention to her dimensions than she'd realized. The thought should probably have concerned her, but instead it just made her smile. Following the coffee smell led her to a kitchen that was all sleek counters and high-end appliances, where Dominic stood at the stove doing something with eggs that smelled incredible. He'd dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking unfairly attractive for someone who'd probably gotten as little sleep as she had. "Good morning," Isabella said from the doorway. Dominic turned, his expression softening when he saw her. "Good morning. I hope you don't mind. I guessed at your size for the clothes. They fit perfectly. Thank you." Isabella moved into the kitchen, accepting the coffee mug he handed her without asking. "You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to." Dominic returned his attention to the pan, his movements efficient and practiced. "Besides, we need to eat before the day starts making demands on us." "What time is it?" 7:30. Your first meeting isn't until 10 and mine's at 9, so we have time." He plated the eggs along with toast and fresh fruit, carrying everything to the island where 2 place settings waited. "I took the liberty of having Marcus pick up some of your things from your apartment. Clothes, toiletries, your laptop. They're in the guest room closet." Isabella paused with her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "You had someone go to my apartment?" "With your keys, which were in your purse from last night. Nothing was disturbed, just collected what you'd need for a few days." Dominic's gaze met hers steadily. "I should have asked first. I apologize for overstepping." Isabella considered being annoyed at the high-handedness of the gesture, but pragmatism won out. She did need her things, and Dominic had clearly been trying to be helpful rather than controlling. Besides, she was learning that his protective instincts manifested in logistics and planning, which was infinitely preferable to Julian's version that had involved restricting where she could go and who she could see. "A few days?" she asked instead, sitting down at the island. "I'd like you to stay here for the rest of the week, at least until we know whether last night's very public display is going to have consequences." Dominic's expression was serious now, The brief domesticity of breakfast giving way to the calculating strategist who ran a criminal empire. Julian Wolfe isn't the real concern. He's embarrassed and angry, but he's not dangerous. However, a lot of people saw us together last night, saw me claim you publicly. That information will travel, and not all of it will reach friendly ears. Isabella's stomach tightened, though she kept her expression calm. You think someone will try to use me to get to you? I think it's a possibility we need to prepare for. Dominic's hand covered hers on the counter. This is what I meant last night when I said your life gets more complicated. The moment I kissed you in front of Miami's elite, I painted a target on your back. Everyone who wants leverage over me now knows exactly where to find it. So we increase security. I stay alert. We handle it. Isabella squeezed his hand. This isn't new territory, Dominic. We've dealt with threats before. Not like this. Before you were my assistant. Valuable, yes, but theoretically replaceable from an outside perspective. Now you're... He stopped, seeming to search for the right words. Yours, Isabella supplied quietly. That's what everyone saw last night. Not your employee, not your associate. Yours. Dominic's jaw tightened. I hate that word in this context. It sounds like ownership. It is ownership in a way. Just mutual. Isabella turned her hand over, interlacing their fingers. I claimed you too, Dominic. When I kissed you back in front of all those people, I was telling everyone in that room that you're mine just as much as I'm yours. That's partnership, mutual possession, choosing each other exclusively. And you're comfortable with that? With the target it puts on you? I'm realistic about it, Isabella corrected. Comfortable implies I'm happy about the danger, which I'm not. But I knew what I was agreeing to last night. I'm not naive enough to think loving you comes without consequences. Dominic's expression shifted into something that looked almost like pain. You deserve better than consequences. You deserve safety and stability and a normal life where the man you love doesn't come with enemies who'd hurt you to hurt him. And you deserve someone who doesn't bring complications from their past. But you got me anyway. Isabella's smile was slight but genuine. We don't get to choose what we deserve, Dominic. We only get to choose what we want. I want you, target and all. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, Isabella's mind already shifting into work mode despite the unusual circumstances. She had reports to review, calls to make, meetings to coordinate. The machinery of Dominic's empire didn't stop running just because their personal lives had gotten complicated. We need to talk about boundaries, Dominic said eventually, his tone shifting into the same careful neutrality he used when negotiating difficult deals. Professional versus personal. How we handle this at the office. Agreed. I've been thinking about that. Isabella set down her fork, organizing her thoughts. At work, we maintain the same professional relationship we've always had. You're still my boss. I'm still your assistant. No special treatment, no obvious favoritism, nothing that undermines my credibility or makes people think I'm getting opportunities based on our relationship rather than my competence. Dominic nodded slowly. That works for me. Though I reserve the right to be possessive if anyone hits on you in my presence. As long as you understand I can handle unwanted attention myself and don't need you threatening people who make conversation at conferences. I would never threaten someone just for talking to you. Dominic's expression was entirely too innocent. I would simply make sure they understood that pursuing you further would be inadvisable for their long-term health and financial security. Isabella laughed despite herself. That's literally a threat. It's a statement of fact delivered with helpful context. You're impossible. You love me anyway. The words hung in the air between them, casual and enormous at the same time. Isabella met Dominic's eyes across the island, seeing vulnerability beneath the confidence. The man behind the reputation waiting to see if she'd confirm what she'd said last night or retreat from it in the clear light of morning. I do, she said simply. Love you. Impossibility and all. Dominic's smile was slow and genuine and absolutely devastating. Good. Because I meant what I said last night. You're everything, Isabella. The center around which everything else orbits. That's a lot of pressure. That's just truth. Dominic stood, collecting their plates with the same efficiency he brought to everything. And speaking of truth, we need to discuss what happens if Julian tries to contact you. Isabella's good mood dimmed slightly. You think he will? I think he spent the night realizing what he lost, and men like Julian Wolf don't handle losing gracefully. Dominic loaded the dishwasher with practiced ease. He'll either try to win you back, convince himself that you were just trying to make him jealous and that you still have feelings for him, or he'll try to sabotage what we have by planting doubt or digging up information he can use against us. He doesn't know anything that could hurt us, Isabella said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. I never told him about your business. He thinks you're just a successful real estate developer. He thinks that now. But if he starts digging, asking questions, pulling threads, Julian has connections and resources. He could potentially uncover things that would be problematic if they reach the wrong people. Isabella processed that, her strategic mind already running scenarios. So we control the narrative. Make sure that if he does go digging, he finds exactly what we want him to find and nothing more. Exactly. Dominic's expression showed approval at how quickly she'd grasped the situation. I've already got people monitoring his communications, tracking who he talks to, and what questions he's asking. So far, it's just wounded pride and confusion, but that could change. You're having him surveilled. I'm being prudent. Dominic dried his hands on a towel, his gaze steady on her face. Anyone who might pose a threat to you gets watched, Isabella. That's not negotiable. Isabella should probably object to the invasiveness of that, the casual way Dominic monitored potential threats without hesitation. Instead, she felt that same warm certainty spreading through her chest. Dominic protecting what mattered to him with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything else. What if he contacts me directly? She asked. Shows up at my apartment or tries to corner me somewhere. Then you tell him politely that you've moved on and you're not interested in revisiting the past. You don't engage beyond that. You definitely don't meet him anywhere private or go anywhere with him alone. Dominic's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. And you tell me immediately so I can make sure he understands that boundary violations have consequences. Dominic, I'm not going to hurt him, Isabella. Not unless he forces my hand by doing something genuinely threatening. Dominic moved around the island to stand in front of her, his hands settling on her shoulders. But I need him to understand that you're under my protection now. That approaching you means dealing with me. That's not about machismo or territorial nonsense. It's about making sure he knows there are real consequences to bothering you. Isabella understood the distinction he was making. This wasn't about Dominic proving something to Julian or engaging in some kind of masculine competition. This was about establishing clear boundaries and ensuring they were respected through the only language men like Julian actually understood: power and consequences. Okay, she agreed, but I want to handle the initial contact myself if it happens. I need him to hear from me directly that I'm done with him, that this isn't some game or temporary situation. After that, if he persists, you can do whatever you think is necessary. Dominic studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing her request against his protective instincts. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. But the conversation happened somewhere public with security nearby. No private meetings, no going anywhere alone with him. Deal. They stood together in the kitchen's morning light, the day waiting beyond the windows with all its complications and demands. Isabella's phone buzzed from where she'd left it charging in the guest room, probably her calendar reminding her about upcoming meetings and obligations. We should get moving, she said reluctantly. You have the Peterson acquisition call at 9 and I need to review the contracts before the legal team meeting. We do. But Dominic didn't move, his hands still warm on her shoulders. Isabella, before we step back into work mode and everything gets complicated again, thank you. For what? For being brave enough to take this chance. For choosing me despite all the very valid reasons you shouldn't. For standing beside me at that gala last night and letting everyone see exactly where you belong. Dominic's expression was utterly serious. I know I'm not easy. I know this life comes with more complications than most people would willingly accept. But having you here, knowing you're choosing this with open eyes, it means more than I know how to express. Isabella reached up to cup his face, her thumbs brushing his cheekbones. You're worth the complications. You're worth the risk and the danger and the constant vigilance. You're worth all of it because you see me, Dominic. Really see me, not the girl from Little Havana who wasn't good enough for Julian's world. Not the assistant who takes notes and manages schedules. Me. All the sharp edges and ambition and determination to be more than what anyone expected. You've always been more, Dominic said quietly. I just had the good sense to notice. They kissed then, slow and sweet and full of promise for a future they were building together despite all the obstacles. When they finally pulled apart, Isabella felt steadier, more grounded, ready to face whatever the day would throw at them. The drive to the office was familiar and strange at the same time. Marcus drove them in the same Mercedes from last night, his expression professionally neutral, despite almost certainly knowing exactly what had transpired between his employer and the woman sitting beside him. Isabella spent the ride reviewing reports on her tablet, while Dominic handled calls, both of them slipping back into professional mode with practiced ease. The office itself was a study in controlled luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Brickell Avenue, modern furniture that managed to look comfortable despite costing a fortune, art that was probably worth more than most people's houses hanging casually on the walls. Isabella's desk sat in a strategic position just outside Dominic's private office, controlling access and managing the flow of information with ruthless efficiency. "Morning, Ms. Cruz." Sarah, the receptionist, smiled as they entered. "You have messages from the Peterson legal team and someone named Julian Wolfe, who called twice this morning asking to speak with you." Isabella's spine stiffened, though she kept her expression neutral. "Did he leave a number?" "He did. Said it was urgent and personal." Sarah's tone suggested she'd already categorized the calls as potentially problematic. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll handle it." Isabella took the message slips, very aware of Dominic's sudden stillness beside her. They walked to her desk in silence, Dominic continuing into his office while Isabella set down her bag and began the morning routine of checking systems and reviewing overnight developments. She could feel his attention on her through the open doorway between their spaces, watching to see how she'd handle Julian's contact. Isabella picked up her office phone and dialed, putting the call on speaker so Dominic could hear. Julian answered on the second ring, his voice careful and overly casual. "Isabella, I wasn't sure you'd call back." "You said it was urgent." Isabella's tone was professionally cool. "What do you need, Julian?" "I wanted to apologize for last night. I was caught off guard seeing you, and I didn't handle it well." He paused, clearly waiting for her to fill the silence. She didn't. After a moment, Julian continued. "I was hoping we could meet for coffee, talk about old times, catch up properly. There's a lot I'd like to say that I didn't get the chance to last night." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Isabella, please, just coffee. One conversation. I think I owe you a real apology, and I'd rather deliver it in person than over the phone." Isabella glanced toward Dominic's office, finding him standing in the doorway watching her with dark eyes. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he was exerting over his protective instincts. He'd agreed to let her handle this, and he was keeping that promise even though everything in his posture screamed that he wanted to take the phone and end the conversation himself. "Fine," Isabella said, making a decision. "Coffee. Tomorrow afternoon at the cafe across from my office. 2:00. 30 minutes, Julian. That's all I'm offering." "That's all I need. Thank you, Isabella. I'll see you tomorrow." She ended the call and sat back in her chair, processing her own decision. Meeting Julian felt necessary, not because she owed him anything, but because she needed to close that chapter of her life completely. Needed to look him in the eye in the clear light of day and confirm that what she felt for him was truly dead, replaced by something infinitely stronger and more real. "You're meeting him." Dominic's voice was carefully neutral as he crossed to her desk. "I am, in public, during business hours, for exactly 30 minutes. Isabella met his eyes steadily. "He needs to hear from me directly that we're done, that last night wasn't some game or attempt to make him jealous. Once he understands that clearly, he'll move on. And if he doesn't, then we handle it together, but I need to try closing this door myself first." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, conflict visible in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "Marcus will be at a nearby table. You won't see him, but he'll be there. 30 minutes, Isabella. If the conversation goes longer or if Julian makes you uncomfortable in any way, you end it immediately." "Agreed?" Isabella appreciated that Dominic was compromising, letting her handle this her way, while still ensuring she had backup. It was the kind of protective that felt supportive rather than controlling. The rest of the day passed in the familiar rhythm of meetings and calls and the endless stream of decisions that kept Dominic's empire running smoothly. Isabella coordinated with legal teams, reviewed acquisition contracts, fielded calls from associates whose names never appeared in legitimate business records, and generally kept the complex machinery of Dominic's operations functioning efficiently. To anyone watching, they were exactly what they'd always been: employer and executive assistant, working in perfect synchronicity born from months of professional partnership. But Isabella felt the difference in every glance Dominic sent her way, every casual touch when he passed documents across her desk, every moment when their eyes met and something warm and private passed between them. At 6 o'clock, when the office staff began filtering out for the evening, Dominic appeared in her doorway with his jacket slung over one shoulder. "Ready to go home?" he asked, the word home carrying weight neither of them addressed directly. "Just finishing these reports." Isabella saved her work, then looked up at him with a slight smile. "Though I suppose I should clarify which home we're talking about." "Mine. If you're still comfortable staying there." Dominic's expression was open, giving her space to refuse. "I meant what I said this morning about wanting you close until we're sure last night won't have blowback." Isabella considered her options. She could insist on returning to her own apartment, maintain some separation and independence. But the truth was, she didn't want to. She wanted to go home with Dominic, share dinner and conversation, and the comfortable intimacy they'd found last night standing together watching the city. "Your place," she confirmed, gathering her things. "Though eventually we should discuss more permanent arrangements." "Eventually," Dominic agreed, something that looked like relief crossing his features. "But not tonight. Tonight we just exist together without planning every detail." They rode the elevator down in comfortable silence, Isabella's hand finding Dominic's naturally as the doors closed. When they reached the lobby, Marcus was waiting with the car, and the drive back to the penthouse felt like coming home in a way Isabella's own apartment never quite had. Dinner was takeout from a Thai place Dominic liked, eaten at the island while they traded stories about their day's ridiculous moments and minor victories. They didn't talk about Julian or security or the complications waiting in the wings. They just existed together, two people learning how to be a couple instead of just colleagues who'd acknowledged mutual attraction. Later, after they'd cleaned up and Isabella had changed into the sleep clothes from the night before, they ended up on the couch with the city glittering beyond the windows. Dominic had his arm around her shoulders, Isabella curled against his side, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "I could get used to this," Isabella said eventually, her voice quiet in the peaceful space. "What, specifically?" "This, us, being together without having to hide what we are." Isabella tilted her head to look up at him. "It's nice. Simple in a way. Nothing else in our lives is simple." "Simple is relative when you're dating Miami's most wanted," Dominic said dryly. "Most wanted by law enforcement or most wanted by me?" "Both, probably." His fingers traced absent patterns on her shoulder. "Does it bother you? What I do, who I am in the larger scheme of things?" Isabella considered the question seriously, knowing he deserved honest reflection rather than easy platitudes. "It bothers me sometimes that people get hurt, that violence is part of how you maintain control, that there are consequences to your decisions that affect people who never chose to be part of this world." Dominic went very still beside her, tension creeping into his shoulders. "But," Isabella continued, "I also understand that you operate in a reality where the rules are different, where showing weakness gets you killed, where mercy is often seen as vulnerability, where the choice is frequently between being the one who acts first or being the one who gets eliminated. You're not a good man by conventional standards, Dominic, but you're not needlessly cruel either. You have lines you won't cross, principles you maintain even when they're inconvenient. That's a very pragmatic way of accepting that your boyfriend is a criminal. You're not just a criminal. You're a strategist operating in an industry that happens to be illegal. You're a businessman who uses different tools than most CEOs. You're a man trying to build something lasting in a world designed for short-term survival." Isabella shifted to face him more directly. And you're the person who saw value in me when I had nothing to offer but determination and potential. That counts for something. Dominic's expression was difficult to read in the dim light. You had far more than determination and potential. You had intelligence and adaptability and the kind of strategic thinking most people spend decades trying to develop. You saw that because you were looking for it. Julian looked at me and saw nothing but limitations and embarrassments. Isabella touched Dominic's face gently. That's the difference between you. He needed me to be less so he could feel like more. You need me to be exactly as sharp and capable and ruthless as I actually am, because that makes me valuable to you. You're valuable to me regardless of what you can do for my organization. I know, but the fact that I can contribute, that I can be useful in your world, that matters too. It makes this partnership instead of dependency. They sat together in comfortable silence, the city breathing beyond the windows, the future spreading out before them uncertain and dangerous and absolutely real. Tomorrow, Isabella would meet Julian for coffee and close that chapter of her life completely. Tomorrow, they'd navigate the complications of being together while managing an empire built on secrets and careful violence. Tomorrow, they'd face whatever consequences came from last night's very public declaration. But tonight, they were just two people who'd found something unexpected and precious in the middle of complicated lives. Two people learning to trust that what they were building together was strong enough to withstand everything waiting in the wings to tear it apart. Isabella fell asleep on Dominic's couch again, wrapped in his arms, feeling safer than she had in years, despite knowing exactly how dangerous their world actually was. And when Dominic carried her to the guest room hours later, she murmured his name and smiled without waking, trusting him completely with her vulnerable sleeping self in a way that would have terrified her weeks ago. Trust, she was learning, wasn't about the absence of danger. It was about choosing who you face that danger beside. She woke the next morning with purpose crystallizing in her chest. Today she would face Julian, close that door permanently, and move forward without the weight of unfinished business pulling at her heels. Isabella dressed carefully for the meeting, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence without trying too hard, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that said she'd moved beyond caring what he thought of her appearance. Dominic watched her prepare from the doorway of the guest room, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Isabella checked her reflection one final time, satisfied with what she saw, a woman in complete control of herself and her choices. He needs to hear it from me. Needs to understand that this isn't about him at all anymore. And if he doesn't accept that, then Marcus can escort him out and we move to more explicit boundary setting. Isabella turned to face Dominic, seeing the tension in his shoulders despite his controlled expression. "I need you to trust me to handle this. I know you want to protect me, but this is something I have to do myself." Dominic crossed to her, his hand settling on her shoulders with familiar warmth. "I do trust you. It's him I don't trust. Men like Julian don't give up easily when they realize what they've lost. Men like Julian also don't risk public scenes that might damage their reputation. He'll be civil because anything else would reflect poorly on him, and image is everything to people like that." Isabella touched Dominic's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. "I'll be fine. 30 minutes, public location, security nearby. Nothing's going to happen. Promise me you'll end it immediately if he makes you uncomfortable." "I promise." Isabella stood on her toes to kiss him briefly. "And I promise I'll come straight back here when it's done. We can have dinner and you can stop worrying about me being stolen away by my ex-boyfriend, who doesn't actually have any power over me whatsoever." Dominic's expression softened slightly. "I'm not worried about him stealing you. I'm worried about him hurting you. There's a difference." "Either way, I can handle it." Isabella stepped back, checking her watch. "I should go. I want to review the Hernandez contract before the meeting, and Marcus is probably waiting." The morning passed with agonizing slowness, despite being packed with calls and meetings and the usual chaos of managing Dominic's empire. Isabella coordinated with lawyers on 3 different continents, approved security protocols for an upcoming acquisition, and fielded increasingly aggressive demands from an associate who seemed to forget that threatening Dominic's assistant was functionally equivalent to threatening Dominic himself. "Mr. Reyes," Isabella said into the phone with ice-cold patience, I understand you're frustrated with the timeline, but your frustration doesn't change reality. The shipment arrives Thursday and not a moment sooner. If you continue to call this office making demands and implicit threats, I'll be forced to inform Mr. Vale that you're becoming a liability. I suspect he'll handle that situation far less diplomatically than I am. Do we understand each other? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then a grudging acknowledgement that yes, Thursday was acceptable, and no, there was no need to bother Mr. Vale with minor scheduling disagreements. Isabella ended the call and looked up to find Dominic standing in his office doorway wearing an expression somewhere between amusement and arousal. "You terrify people," he observed. "Good, they should be terrified. Half of them seem to forget that disrespecting me is disrespecting you by extension." Isabella made notes on her tablet about the Reyes situation. "He'll test boundaries again in a few weeks. They always do. And you'll handle it again with that perfect combination of professionalism and barely veiled threat that makes grown men reconsider their life choices." Dominic's smile was genuine. "You're wasted on legitimate business, you know. You could run a criminal empire single-handedly. I prefer supporting roles. Less chance of getting shot. Debatable, given current circumstances." Isabella glanced at her watch. 1:45. 15 minutes until she was supposed to meet Julian at the cafe across the street. Her stomach tightened with nerves she refused to acknowledge, her mind already running through potential conversation scenarios and appropriate responses. "I should head down," she said, standing and smoothing her suit jacket. Dominic crossed to her desk, his hand finding hers with gentle pressure. "You're sure about this?" "Completely." Isabella squeezed his fingers. "I need closure, Dominic. Need to look him in the eye and confirm that what I feel for you is real and permanent, not some rebound or revenge plot. This conversation will prove that, to him and to me. You don't need to prove anything to me. Maybe not, but I need to prove it to myself." Isabella touched his face briefly. "I'll be back in 45 minutes. Try not to orchestrate anyone's disappearance while I'm gone." "I make no promises." She took the elevator down alone, her reflection in the polished steel doors showing a woman who looked far more composed than she felt. The cafe was exactly where she'd specified, public, well-lit, full of business professionals on lunch breaks and students with laptops. Safe territory where Julian would have to maintain his civilized veneer. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table with a newspaper and coffee, looking like any other businessman taking a break. He caught her eye briefly, a subtle nod confirming he had visual on the entire space. Julian arrived exactly on time, which surprised her. He'd always been casually late when they were together, a power play disguised as forgetfulness that kept her waiting and reinforced his importance relative to hers. Today he wore an expensive suit and an expression carefully arranged into contrition. "Isabella." He stood when she approached, that polished smile firmly in place. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would." "You said it was important." Isabella sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her attention sharp. "I'm giving you 30 minutes, Julian. Make them count." His smile faltered slightly at her directness. "Right. Well, I wanted to apologize properly for how I ended things between us. I was young and stupid, and I didn't appreciate what I had." "You were 28. That's not young. That's just selfish." Isabella's tone was conversational, almost pleasant, but apology noted. "Is that all?" Julian blinked, clearly thrown by her lack of emotional response. "I was hoping we could talk about what happened at the gala, about you and Dominic Vale." "What about us?" "Are you really with him, or was that just—" Julian gestured vaguely. "You know, making a point, showing me what I lost." Isabella studied him for a long moment, seeing the genuine confusion beneath his carefully maintained composure. He really believed that everything she did still revolved around him somehow, that her life and choices existed in relation to their failed relationship rather than being completely independent of it. "Julian, I'm going to be very clear with you because I think you need to hear this explicitly." Isabella leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady on his face. "What you saw at the gala was real. Dominic and I are together, genuinely, seriously together. That has absolutely nothing to do with you. I didn't kiss him to make you jealous or prove anything about our past relationship. I kissed him because I wanted to, because I'm in love with him, because he's become the most important person in my life. Julian's expression went carefully blank, that mask of polite interest he wore when hearing things he didn't want to acknowledge. You barely know him. I've worked directly with him for 8 months. I know him far better than I ever knew you, actually. I know what he values, what scares him, what drives his decisions. I know his weaknesses and his strengths and exactly what kind of man he is beneath the public persona. Isabella's smile was slight but genuine. With you, I spent 2 years trying to figure out who you really were beneath the privilege and charm. With Dominic, I knew within 3 months. That's the difference between someone who hides themselves and someone who's honest about exactly what they are. He's dangerous, Isabella. I've been asking around, and the stories I'm hearing are none of your business. Isabella's tone hardened. What Dominic does professionally has nothing to do with you, and the fact that you're asking around about him is both inappropriate and potentially stupid, depending on who you've been talking to. Julian's jaw tightened. I'm concerned about you. I still care what happens to you, and getting involved with someone like Vale is asking for trouble. Your concern is noted and dismissed. I'm a grown woman making informed choices about my own life. I don't need your protection or your approval. Isabella checked her watch. 15 minutes down, 15 to go. Is there anything else you wanted to say? Because if this is just going to be you questioning my judgment and trying to convince me I've made a mistake, we can end this now. I want you back. The words dropped between them like stones, heavy and graceless. Julian's expression had shifted from polite concern to something rawer, more genuine. For the first time since sitting down, Isabella saw actual emotion beneath his carefully maintained composure. I've spent the last 2 days thinking about what I lost, Julian continued, his voice low and urgent. Seeing you at that gala, so confident and beautiful and completely out of my reach, it made me realize what an idiot I was. I let you go because I was too focused on what other people thought, on maintaining some image that doesn't even matter. But you matter, Isabella. You always mattered, and I was too blind and stupid to see it. Isabella felt absolutely nothing hearing this declaration. No satisfaction at his regret, no anger at his timing, no temptation to consider his offer. Just a sort of distant observation that he was finally saying words she'd once desperately wanted to hear, and they landed with all the emotional impact of a weather report. No, she said simply. Julian blinked. No? No, Julian. I don't want you back. I don't want to revisit our relationship or give you another chance or explore whether things might be different now that you've realized my value. Isabella's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, completely devoid of anger or hurt. What we had is over. It's been over for 3 years. This isn't about timing or circumstances or whether you've changed. It's about the simple fact that I don't love you anymore. I don't think I even like you very much, honestly. Because of him, because of Vale. Julian's expression hardened. He's manipulated you somehow, made you think, stop. Isabella's tone could have cut glass. Don't insult my intelligence by suggesting I'm being manipulated. I chose Dominic with full awareness of who and what he is. I chose him because he sees me as an equal, values my input, trusts me with real responsibility. He doesn't need me to be less so he can be more. He wants me exactly as sharp and capable and ambitious as I actually am. I could give you that now. I've changed, Isabella. I understand what I did wrong. You're doing it right now. Isabella's laugh was short and humorless. You're sitting here telling me you've changed while simultaneously dismissing my stated feelings and trying to convince me I've been manipulated. That's exactly the same condescension you showed me throughout our entire relationship. The belief that you know what's best for me better than I know myself. Julian's face flushed slightly. That's not what I'm doing. It's exactly what you're doing. I told you I'm in love with Dominic. Your response was to suggest he's manipulated me. I told you I don't want you back. Your response is to keep arguing as if my clearly stated preferences don't actually matter. Isabella stood, gathering her purse. This conversation is over. I came here to give you closure, to make it absolutely clear that we're done. Consider that message delivered. Isabella, wait. Julian reached for her wrist. He never made contact. Marcus was there instantly, his large frame materializing between them with the kind of speed that suggested extensive combat training. His expression was professionally neutral, but there was no mistaking the threat in his posture. "The lady is leaving," Marcus said quietly. "I suggest you stay seated and finish your coffee." Julian's hand dropped immediately, his face going pale as he recognized the implicit violence in Marcus's calm demeanor. "I wasn't going to hurt her. Doesn't matter what you were going to do. What matters is you're not going to touch her." Marcus shifted slightly, giving Isabella space to move past him. "Ms. Cruz?" "Thank you, Marcus." Isabella walked toward the cafe entrance without looking back, feeling Julian's stare burning between her shoulder blades. She made it outside before the adrenaline hit, her hand shaking slightly as she crossed the street back toward the office. The confrontation had gone exactly as she'd predicted. Julian unable to accept her decision, trying to argue his way back into her life, fundamentally incapable of respecting her clearly stated boundaries. The elevator ride up to the office felt longer than usual, Isabella's mind replaying the conversation and finding satisfaction in how completely unmoved she'd been by Julian's declaration. 3 years ago, hearing him say he wanted her back would have devastated her with its terrible timing. Today it had felt like listening to a stranger describe feelings for someone she used to be. Dominic looked up the moment she entered the office, his dark eyes scanning her face for signs of distress. "How did it go?" "Exactly as expected. He apologized, then tried to convince me I was making a mistake being with you, then declared he wanted me back." Isabella set her purse down, her movements deliberately calm. "I told him no, explained that I'm in love with you and completely uninterested in revisiting our past relationship." He tried to argue. Marcus intervened when Julian reached for me. End of story. Dominic was around his desk and across the space in seconds, his hands framing her face as he searched her expression. "He touched you." "Tried to." Marcus stopped him before he made contact. Isabella covered Dominic's hands with her own. "I'm fine. Not scared, not upset, just satisfied that I finally have complete closure. Seeing him, listening to his excuses and justifications, it confirmed that what I feel for you is absolutely real and permanent. Not rebound, not revenge, real." Some of the tension drained from Dominic's shoulders. "You're sure you're okay?" "Completely." Isabella smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Actually, I feel better than okay. I feel free, like I've finally closed a chapter that's been hanging open for 3 years." Dominic pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with careful strength. Isabella melted into the embrace, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other in the quiet office. "I was worried," Dominic admitted quietly, "that seeing him would stir up old feelings, that you'd remember what you had together and question whether this is really what you want." "This is exactly what I want." Isabella pulled back enough to look up at him. "Julian and I had a relationship built on me trying to be someone I wasn't. With you, I get to be exactly who I am, sharp edges and ambition, and all the parts of myself I used to think I needed to hide. That's not something I'd give up for anything." Dominic's expression softened into something that looked almost vulnerable. "You scare me sometimes." "Why?" "Because you've become so essential that I can't imagine functioning without you. My business, my life, my future, all of it is built around the assumption that you'll be there. That's a dangerous amount of dependency for someone in my position." Isabella understood what he was really saying, that loving her made him vulnerable in ways he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding, that she represented a weakness his enemies could exploit, that choosing her meant accepting risk on a scale that would terrify most people. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "Every day I'm aware that being with you means accepting danger I can't fully control, that people might try to hurt me to hurt you, that I'm gambling my safety and possibly my life on the belief that what we have is worth those risks. And is it? Worth the risk?" "Every single day." Isabella touched his face gently. "You're worth it, Dominic. This partnership, this love, this life we're building, all of it is worth the fear and the danger and the uncertainty." They kissed then, slow and deep and full of everything they couldn't quite put into words. When they finally broke apart, Isabella felt steadier, more certain than she had since the gala turned their private understanding into public declaration. "We should get back to work," Dominic said reluctantly, though he made no move to release her. "You have that conference call with the Singapore investors at 3. And you have the Hernandez meeting at 4. Isabella stepped back with visible effort. "Though I'm tempted to cancel everything and just stay here with you." "Tempting but inadvisable. People are counting on us to keep the machinery running." Dominic's smile was slight but genuine. "Tonight, though, tonight we can ignore the world and just exist together." "I'm holding you to that." The afternoon passed in the familiar rhythm of work, both of them slipping back into professional mode despite the fundamental shift in their relationship. Isabella coordinated calls, reviewed contracts, managed the endless stream of people who needed Dominic's attention or approval. To any observer, nothing had changed, but Isabella felt the difference in every glance Dominic sent her way, every casual touch when he passed documents across her desk, every moment when their eyes met, and something warm and private passed between them. At 6 o'clock, just as Isabella was preparing to shut down for the day, her desk phone rang with an internal extension she didn't recognize. She answered with her usual professional greeting. "Ms. Cruz, this is security downstairs. We have a Julian Wolf in the lobby insisting he needs to speak with you. He doesn't have an appointment, and he's becoming somewhat agitated. Would you like us to have him removed?" Isabella's stomach tightened. She'd been clear with Julian that they were done, that there was nothing left to discuss. The fact that he'd shown up at her office anyway suggested he either hadn't accepted her message or was actively choosing to ignore it. "I'll be right down," she said, already standing. She ended the call and looked toward Dominic's office, finding him watching her through the glass partition with sharp attention. "Julian's downstairs," Isabella explained, crossing to his doorway. "Security called because he's insisting on seeing me." Dominic's expression went dangerously still. "You're not going down there alone." "I'm going down there with security present to make it absolutely clear that he needs to leave me alone." "This is boundary enforcement, Dominic. If I let you handle it, he'll just think I need protection. I need him to understand that I'm capable of shutting him down myself." "I don't like this." "You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me to handle it." Isabella grabbed her phone and keycard. "If it makes you feel better, you can watch from the security feed. But I'm doing this myself." The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, Isabella's mind already preparing for whatever version of Julian she was about to encounter. Agitated, the security guard had said, that could mean anything from annoyed to genuinely unstable. The lobby was elegant marble and modern furniture, with a security desk positioned strategically near the entrance. Julian stood near the doors, his expensive suit rumpled and his expression somewhere between desperate and angry. He looked like he'd been drinking, though it was hard to tell if that was recent or ongoing since their coffee meeting. "Isabella." He moved toward her the moment she stepped out of the elevator. "Thank God. I need to talk to you." "We already talked, Julian. I was very clear about where things stand between us." Isabella stopped several feet away, maintaining deliberate distance. "What are you doing here?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about Vale, about your choices, about everything. And I can't accept it, Isabella. I can't accept that you're throwing your life away on someone like him. That's not your decision to make, my life, my choices, my consequences." Isabella kept her voice calm despite rising irritation. "You need to leave, now. This is harassment, Julian." "Harassment? I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake." Julian's voice rose, drawing attention from the few people still in the lobby. "Do you have any idea who Dominic Vale really is? What he's involved in?" "I've been digging, asking questions, and the things I'm hearing are none of your business and potentially dangerous for you to be spreading around." Isabella's tone hardened. "I told you to stop asking questions about Dominic. The fact that you ignored that advice shows exactly how little you actually respect my judgment. I respect you enough to try to protect you from a man who's going to get you killed." Julian grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "You need to listen to me, Isabella. You need to—" He didn't finish the sentence. Security guards appeared on either side of him, their hands firm on his shoulders as they pulled him away from Isabella. Julian struggled briefly, then seemed to realize how futile resistance would be. "Let go of me! Isabella, please, just listen." "The lady has asked you to leave, Mr. Wolf." The head security guard's voice was professionally neutral but firm. "If you continue to harass her, we'll be forced to call the police and file a restraining order. Is that what you want?" Julian's face went pale, probably imagining the scandal of being forcibly removed from an office building and potentially arrested for harassment. His family name carried weight in Atlanta, but this was Miami, and here he was just another entitled man who couldn't accept being told no. "This isn't over," Julian said, his gaze locked on Isabella's face. "You're making a mistake, and when you realize it, don't expect me to be waiting." "I won't," Isabella said calmly. "Goodbye, Julian. Don't contact me again." The security guards escorted him toward the exit, and Isabella watched until he disappeared through the doors before allowing herself to breathe. Her arm throbbed where Julian had grabbed her, and she rubbed it absently, already knowing there would be bruises tomorrow. The elevator chimed behind her. Isabella turned to find Dominic striding across the lobby, his expression absolutely murderous. She'd never seen him look so openly furious, all his usual careful control stripped away by whatever he'd witnessed on the security feed. "He touched you," Dominic said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Security handled it. He's gone." Isabella caught his arm before he could head for the exit. "Dominic, stop. It's over." "He grabbed you hard enough to leave marks. I saw it on the camera." Dominic's jaw was tight, fury radiating from every line of his body. "That's assault, Isabella. That's him putting his hands on you in anger, and it's not something I'm going to ignore." "What are you going to do? Follow him and beat him bloody in the street?" Isabella moved to stand directly in front of him, forcing Dominic to look at her instead of the door. "That's not who you are with me. That's not how we handle this." "Then tell me how we handle a man who physically assaulted you in my building while trying to convince you to leave me." "We file a police report documenting the incident. We get a restraining order that makes any future contact legally actionable. We let the law handle it first before resorting to anything else." Isabella touched Dominic's face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "I know you want to protect me, but I need you to do it smart rather than violent. Julian's not worth compromising yourself over." Dominic closed his eyes briefly, clearly struggling with instincts that screamed for immediate retaliation. "He hurt you." "He grabbed my arm. It'll bruise and then it'll heal. It's not worth starting a war over." Isabella kept her voice gentle but firm. "Please, Dominic. Trust me to know what's proportionate here." After a long moment, Dominic nodded slowly. "We file the report tonight, restraining order by tomorrow. But if he comes near you again, if he so much as sends you a text message, all bets are off." "Agreed." Isabella sagged slightly with relief. "Thank you for trusting my judgment on this." "I'm trying. It's not easy watching someone hurt you and not immediately destroying them for it." Dominic's arms came around her carefully, as if she might break. "You're more important to me than anything else in this world, Isabella. Sometimes that makes me irrational." "Sometimes that makes you human," Isabella corrected, leaning into his warmth. "But I need you to remember that I'm strong enough to survive a grabbed arm. I'm not fragile, Dominic. I'm not breakable." "Everyone's breakable if enough pressure gets applied." "Then it's a good thing I have you to make sure excessive pressure never gets the chance." They stood together in the empty lobby, security discreetly pretending not to notice their embrace, the evening stretching out before them with all its complications temporarily held at bay. Tomorrow they'd deal with police reports and legal proceedings, and whatever fallout came from Julian's increasingly erratic behavior. Tonight they'd go home together and pretend that the world beyond Dominic's penthouse didn't exist. The drive back was quiet, Isabella processing the confrontation while Dominic made calls to his attorney arranging for the restraining order paperwork to be prepared immediately. Marcus drove with his usual professional silence, though Isabella caught him glancing at her in the rearview mirror more frequently than usual, clearly concerned about the incident. "I'm fine, Marcus," she said quietly. "Really, barely more than a grabbed arm." "You shouldn't have had to handle that alone," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an edge of reproach. "I should have been there. You were 30 feet away. You couldn't have stopped it without causing a scene, and scenes are exactly what Julian wants. He's trying to paint me as a victim who needs saving so he can swoop in and be the hero." Isabella shook her head. "I won't give him that narrative." Dinner that night was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Dominic kept glancing at Isabella's arm where faint bruising was already starting to appear, his expression darkening each time. Isabella finally took his hand and held it firmly, forcing him to focus on her face instead. Stop looking at the bruises. They don't matter. They matter to me. Then look at me instead. Look at the woman who shut him down, set clear boundaries, and walked away without needing rescuing. That's who I am, Dominic. That's who you fell in love with. Not some delicate thing that needs constant protection. Dominic's expression softened slightly. I know who you are. Doesn't make it easier watching you get hurt. I know, but you have to find a way to live with it, because I'm not going to hide behind you every time things get difficult. Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. We're partners. That means sometimes you protect me, and sometimes I handle things myself. We have to trust each other to know which situations require which approach. And if I can't, if my instinct to protect you overrides my ability to let you handle things yourself, then we'll work on it together until you can. That's what partners do. They grow and adapt and figure out how to navigate each other's needs and boundaries. Isabella smiled slightly. You're not perfect, Dominic. Neither am I. But we're perfect for each other, and that's what matters. They ended up on the couch again, wrapped around each other while the city glittered beyond the windows. Isabella felt Dominic gradually relax against her, his earlier fury fading into the quiet certainty of her presence. This was what love looked like, she thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but choosing each other every day, despite all the reasons it would be easier not to. I filed the police report, Dominic said eventually, his voice quiet in the peaceful space. My attorney will have the restraining order ready for your signature tomorrow. After that, if Julian contacts you in any way, he'll be arrested. Good. Maybe the legal consequences will make him understand what clear communication hasn't. And if they don't, then we'll handle it, together. Isabella tilted her head to look up at him. Whatever comes next, we face it as a team. That's what we agreed, remember? I remember. Dominic's fingers traced gentle patterns on her shoulder. I love you, Isabella Cruz, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. It terrifies me and grounds me in equal measure. I love you too. Terrifying intensity and all. Isabella smiled against his chest. We're going to be fine, Dominic. Better than fine. We're going to build something extraordinary together. You really believe that? I know it, because we're both too stubborn to accept anything less. They sat in comfortable silence, the future stretching out before them uncertain and dangerous and full of possibility. Julian was handled, boundaries were set, and consequences were established for crossing them. Tomorrow they'd continue building the life they'd chosen together, complicated, unconventional, absolutely real. For tonight, this was enough. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, choosing partnership over safety, love over convenience, truth over comfortable lies. Two people learning to trust that what they were building was strong enough to withstand whatever waited in the wings to tear it apart. Isabella fell asleep on Dominic's couch for the third night in a row, and when he carried her to bed, his bed this time, not the guest room, she murmured his name and smiled, trusting him completely with her vulnerable, sleeping self. Trust, Isabella had learned, wasn't about the absence of danger. It was about choosing who you faced that danger beside, and knowing they'd stand firm when everything else fell apart. She woke wrapped in Dominic's arms, morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom. For a moment, Isabella just lay there, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers, the absolute rightness of being exactly where she was. This was different from the guest room, from falling asleep on the couch and being carried somewhere safe but separate. This was waking up in Dominic's bed, in his space, surrounded by his scent and his presence. This was intimacy beyond the physical, the kind of trust that came from choosing to be vulnerable together. You're thinking too loud, Dominic murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. I can practically hear the gears turning. Isabella smiled, tilting her head back to look at him. I'm thinking that I like waking up here, that I could get used to this. Good, because I have no intention of letting you sleep anywhere else. Dominic's eyes were warm in the morning light, softer than she usually saw them. How's your arm? Isabella flexed it experimentally, feeling the dull ache of bruising but nothing serious. Fine. Sore, but fine. Stop worrying about it. I'll stop worrying when the bruises fade and Julian Wolfe is no longer a variable we need to account for. Dominic's fingers traced the discolored skin with devastating gentleness. I hate seeing marks on you that I didn't put there. That's a very possessive thing to say. I'm a very possessive man. You knew that when you agreed to this. Dominic's smile was slight but genuine. Though I promise any marks I leave will be significantly more pleasurable in their creation. Heat flooded Isabella's body at the implication, her pulse quickening. They'd been dancing around the physical aspect of their relationship for days now, acknowledging the attraction while focusing on establishing emotional foundations first. But lying here in his bed, wrapped in his arms, that restraint felt increasingly unnecessary. Dominic! Her phone buzzed from the nightstand, shattering the moment. Isabella groaned, reaching for it reluctantly and finding a text from the attorney Dominic had hired. The restraining order was ready for her signature, and they'd arranged for Julian to be served by end of business today. Work intrudes, Isabella said with a sigh, though I suppose that's what happens when you sleep with your boss. Technically, we haven't slept together in that sense yet. We've just shared a bed. Dominic's expression was utterly innocent. Very chaste, very professional. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway. Isabella kissed him instead of responding, slow and thorough and full of promise for when they had more time and fewer obligations pressing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Dominic's eyes were nearly black with want. We should stop, he said, though he made no move to release her. We should, Isabella agreed, not moving either. We have meetings, responsibilities, an empire to run. All true. But I really don't want to stop. Isabella laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Then don't. We're allowed to be late occasionally. We're never late. Then today can be a first. Isabella shifted to straddle him, watching his expression flare with heat. Unless you'd rather go review acquisition contracts and coordinate with violent criminals at 8 in the morning. Dominic's hand settled on her hips, his grip firm and possessive. I'd rather stay exactly where I am for the foreseeable future. Good answer. They were spectacularly late to the office that morning, arriving separately with carefully neutral expressions that fooled absolutely no one. Sarah, the receptionist, took one look at Isabella's slightly rumpled appearance and knowing smile, then wisely said nothing beyond handing over the morning messages. The day passed in controlled chaos, conference calls and contract negotiations, and the endless stream of decisions that kept Dominic's empire functioning. Isabella coordinated everything with her usual efficiency, though she caught herself smiling at inappropriate moments, replaying the morning in vivid detail. At 2 o'clock, the attorney called to confirm that Julian had been served with the restraining order at his hotel. According to the process server, Julian had been furious, making threats about lawsuits and character defamation that would go nowhere given the documented assault and harassment. He's on a flight back to Atlanta tonight, the attorney reported. Seems to have finally gotten the message that his presence here is neither wanted nor welcome. Isabella felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally release. Julian was leaving, going back to his life in Atlanta where he belonged, leaving her free to build her future in Miami without his interference. Thank you, she said sincerely, for handling this so quickly. Mr. Vale pays me exceptionally well to handle things quickly, and for what it's worth, Ms. Cruz, I'm glad to see him finally happy. He's been alone too long. The call ended, and Isabella sat back in her chair processing the simple statement. Dominic had been alone, she realized, surrounded by associates and employees and people whose loyalty he'd bought or earned, but fundamentally isolated by the nature of what he did and who he was. Until she'd walked into his office 8 months ago and somehow managed to slip past every defense he'd built. Good news? Dominic appeared in her doorway, reading her expression with practiced ease. Julian's on a flight to Atlanta tonight. He's been served with the restraining order, and according to your attorney, he's finally accepted that I'm not changing my mind. Isabella stood, crossing to where Dominic waited. It's over, really over. That chapter of my life is finally closed. Dominic pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with careful strength. How do you feel? Relieved, free, ready to stop looking backward and start focusing completely on what's ahead. Isabella looked up at him, seeing her future reflected in his dark eyes. Ready to build something real with you without the past constantly pulling at my attention. And what does that future look like to you? Isabella considered the question seriously, understanding that Dominic was asking about more than just immediate plans. He wanted to know if she saw permanence here, if this was something she was willing to commit to long-term, despite all its complications. I see us continuing to build your empire together, making it stronger, more legitimate, harder to dismantle. I see us navigating the dangerous parts while establishing the legal framework that will eventually let you walk away from the violence if you choose to. Isabella's voice was steady, confident. I see us learning to balance the professional and personal, figuring out how to be partners in every sense while maintaining the boundaries that keep both functioning effectively. I see us making mistakes and fixing them together, facing threats and eliminating them, building something that lasts beyond the immediate future. That's very long-term thinking. I'm a very long-term thinker. I don't do anything halfway, Dominic. Not my career, not my relationships, not my life. If I'm in this, I'm in it completely, for the duration, whatever that means. Dominic's expression shifted into something that looked almost vulnerable. What if the duration is dangerous? What if being with me long-term means accepting risks that could get you killed? Then I accept those risks with open eyes, the same way you accept the risk that loving me makes you vulnerable in ways your enemies could exploit. Isabella touched his face gently. We're both gambling here, Dominic. Both betting that what we're building is worth the danger that comes with it. The difference is, we're doing it together instead of alone. I want to give you everything, Dominic said quietly. Security, stability, a future where you don't have to constantly look over your shoulder or wonder if today's the day something goes wrong. But I don't know if I can promise that while staying in this business. Then maybe it's time to start planning your exit strategy. Isabella had been thinking about this for weeks, running numbers and scenarios in her head during quiet moments. You've spent years building legitimate businesses alongside the criminal operations. What if we shifted focus, started prioritizing the legal enterprises, slowly divesting from the dangerous parts, building toward a future where Dominic Vale, the businessman, completely eclipses Dominic Vale, the crime lord? Dominic was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the suggestion. That would take years, maybe decades, and it would mean accepting significantly reduced income during the transition. You're already wealthier than most people can conceive of being. You could stop working entirely tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of your life. Isabella's tone was pragmatic. The question isn't whether you can afford the transition, it's whether you want to badly enough to start making the hard choices it would require. And if I don't? If I decide the criminal operations are too profitable to abandon, too integral to my power base to simply walk away from? Then I stay anyway, because I love you, and I chose this with full awareness of what it meant. But I'll keep pushing you toward the exit, keep showing you that there's a different future available if you're brave enough to reach for it. Isabella's smile was slight but genuine. I'm not going anywhere, Dominic. Whether you transition to completely legitimate business or stay exactly as you are, I'm staying. I just think you'd be happier and safer if you started building towards something that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. Dominic pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's probably the hardest thing you'd ever do, walking away from the power you've built and the reputation you've cultivated. But simple and easy aren't the same thing, and nothing worth having comes without sacrifice. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You're just now paying attention. Isabella kissed him briefly. Think about it. We don't have to decide anything today, but start considering what you actually want your life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Start imagining a future where we're not constantly managing threats and navigating criminal politics. See if that vision appeals to you. They stood together in her office doorway, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, the city breathing beyond the glass. Isabella felt something settle in her chest, certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. That this partnership was strong enough to survive not just immediate threats, but long-term evolution. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to their lives. Isabella officially moved into Dominic's penthouse, though she kept her apartment as a backup and occasional retreat when she needed space to think. They navigated the complexities of being together while working together, establishing boundaries and communication patterns that kept both relationships healthy. Julian didn't contact her again. According to occasional updates from Dominic's security team, he'd returned to Atlanta and resumed his life there, apparently having finally accepted that Isabella was truly beyond his reach. The restraining order remained in place, a legal barrier ensuring that any future impulse to contact her would come with immediate consequences. Isabella's role in Dominic's organization evolved subtly. She was still his executive assistant officially, but increasingly she functioned as a true partner, attending high-level strategy meetings, offering input on major decisions, helping navigate the complex politics of Miami's underworld with the same competence she brought to legitimate business negotiations. "You're terrifying," one of Dominic's associates told her after a particularly tense negotiation where Isabella had calmly dismantled another organization's demands and restructured the deal in their favor. "Absolutely terrifying. I'm glad you're on our side." "I'm on Dominic's side," Isabella corrected, "which means I'm on the side of anyone who's loyal to him and ruthlessly opposed to anyone who isn't. It's a simple framework, really." Dominic had smiled at that, pride and affection warming his expression in equal measure. 3 months after the gala, Dominic called a meeting with his top associates, the men who controlled various aspects of his empire and whose loyalty was essential to maintaining power. Isabella sat beside him at the conference table, no longer taking notes or managing logistics, but participating as an equal voice in the discussion. "I'm making some changes," Dominic announced without preamble. "Over the next 5 years, we're going to be shifting our focus away from the riskier operations and toward legitimate business expansion. That means divesting from drug distribution, reducing our involvement in protection rackets, and generally transitioning toward an operation that can withstand legal scrutiny." The room went very quiet. Isabella could feel the tension rising as powerful men processed what amounted to a fundamental restructuring of everything they'd built. "That's a significant change in direction," one of them said carefully. "A lot of our income comes from those operations you're talking about eliminating." "It does, which is why we're not doing it overnight. This is a 5-year plan, maybe longer, depending on how the transition goes." Dominic's voice was calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. "But the direction is set. We're moving toward legitimacy, and everyone in this room either adapts to that reality or finds employment elsewhere." "Why now?" another associate asked, his gaze sliding briefly to Isabella before returning to Dominic. "We've been operating successfully for years. Why change what works?" "Because I want a different future than the one I've been building toward." Dominic's hand found Isabella's under the table, squeezing gently. "Because I've realized that real power isn't about how much fear you can generate or how many illegal operations you control. Real power is building something that lasts, something that can be passed down, something that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. That's the empire I'm interested in creating now." The meeting continued for hours, working through logistics and timelines and the complex process of unwinding criminal operations while maintaining enough control to prevent power vacuums that would destabilize everything. Isabella contributed strategic input, her mind already running scenarios and calculating risks, helping Dominic navigate the treacherous politics of such a fundamental shift. When everyone finally left and they were alone in the conference room, Dominic pulled Isabella close, exhaustion and relief evident in his expression. "That went better than I expected," he admitted. "I thought there'd be more pushback. They're loyal to you, not to the specific operations. As long as they're still making money and maintaining power, most of them don't actually care whether it comes from drug distribution or real estate development." Isabella kissed him softly. "I'm proud of you. This is the right decision, even if it's the harder one. I'm only making it because you showed me there was an alternative. Before you, I couldn't imagine anything beyond this life. Now I can see a future where we're not constantly managing threats and violence, where we can just exist together without always looking over our shoulders. We'll still have enemies. Legitimate business comes with its own conflicts. But the kind that get resolved in courtrooms instead of with bullets. I'll take that trade any day." Dominic's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for pushing me toward this. for showing me what I could become if I was brave enough to try. You've always been brave. You just needed a reason to direct that bravery towards something other than survival." Isabella smiled against his chest. "Now you have one. Multiple ones, actually. A future worth building, a relationship worth protecting, a life worth living instead of just enduring." They stood together in the empty conference room, the city glittering beyond the windows, the future stretching out before them uncertain but full of possibility. 5 years, Dominic had said. 5 years to transition from crime lord to legitimate businessman, to build the kind of empire that could withstand scrutiny and last beyond his lifetime. It wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance from associates who preferred the old ways, threats from competitors who saw the transition as weakness, challenges from law enforcement who wouldn't immediately believe in his reformation. But they'd face all of it together, the same way they'd faced everything else since that night at the gala when Dominic had kissed her in front of Miami's elite and changed both their lives forever. 6 months after Julian left Miami, Isabella was working late in the office when Dominic appeared in her doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "There's something I want to show you." Isabella saved her work and followed him to the private elevator, curious about the slight nervousness she detected beneath his controlled exterior. They rode up to the penthouse in comfortable silence, Dominic's hand warm in hers, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. The penthouse was dark when they entered, but Dominic led her straight to the windows overlooking the bay. Miami sprawled before them in all its glittering chaos, beautiful and dangerous and absolutely alive. "When I bought this place 10 years ago, I thought this view represented everything I'd achieved," Dominic said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. "Power, wealth, control over my own destiny. I'd look out these windows and feel satisfied that I'd built something from nothing, that I'd survived when plenty of people had bet against me." "And now?" Isabella prompted gently. "Now I look at this view and all I see is how empty it was, how isolated I was up here, surrounded by luxury but fundamentally alone, how much I was missing without even realizing it." Dominic turned to face her, his dark eyes serious. "And then you walked into my life and everything changed. Suddenly this view wasn't about what I'd achieved alone, it was about what we could build together. This penthouse stopped being a fortress and started being a home. My empire stopped being about survival and started being about creating something worth passing on." Isabella's throat tightened with emotion, understanding that Dominic was working towards something significant, but not quite sure what. "You transformed my entire world, Isabella. Made me want things I'd convinced myself were impossible. Made me believe in futures I'd stopped imagining." Dominic took both her hands in his expression open and vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. "I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. You're my partner, my equal, the person I trust most in this world. And I want that to be permanent, official, legally and emotionally binding in every way that matters." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that made Isabella's breath catch. "Marry me," Dominic said simply, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring that caught the city lights and threw them back in brilliant fragments. "Not because it makes strategic sense or because it serves some business purpose, but because I want to spend the rest of my life building our future together. I want you beside me when we transition this empire into something legitimate. I want you there when we face challenges and celebrate victories. I want you to be my wife, Isabella, in every sense of that word." Isabella stared at the ring, her mind racing through implications and consequences, and the sheer enormity of what he was offering. Marriage to Dominic Vale meant legally binding herself to everything he was and everything he'd been. It meant accepting permanent association with his reputation, his past, his complicated present. It meant choosing this life irrevocably, closing doors to alternatives she might otherwise have considered. It also meant partnership with the man she loved more than anything, building a future together without reservation, committing fully to the life they'd been creating for months. It meant trust and certainty, and the kind of permanent connection she'd once thought was impossible for her to find. "Yes," Isabella said, the word coming easily despite the weight of everything it meant. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because it's safe or simple or strategically advantageous, but because I love you and I want to build our future together officially and permanently. Dominic's smile was incandescent as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the metal warm and the diamond perfect. Then he was kissing her, deep and thorough and full of promise for everything they were choosing together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella looked down at the ring sparkling on her finger and felt certainty settle in her chest. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be, exactly who she was supposed to be with, exactly the future she was supposed to be building. "We're going to be extraordinary together," she said, looking up at Dominic with absolute confidence. "We already are," he corrected. "This just makes it official." They stood together at the windows overlooking their city, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build something lasting despite every obstacle. Behind them stretched their complicated past, Isabella's journey from heartbreak to strength, Dominic's evolution from isolated crime lord to man capable of genuine partnership. Ahead lay their uncertain future, the long transition toward legitimacy, the challenges that would test them, the life they'd build together through determination and love and unwavering commitment to each other. The engagement announcement caused ripples through Miami's various social circles. Legitimate business leaders who'd only known Dominic as a successful real estate developer sent congratulations. Associates from the darker parts of his empire understood that Isabella's new official status made her absolutely untouchable. Harming Dominic Vale's fiancée would be suicidal on every level. And somewhere in Atlanta, Julian Wolfe presumably learned that the woman he'd once discarded as not enough was marrying one of the most powerful men in Miami. Isabella hoped he understood the full irony of it, that his rejection had been the catalyst that sent her to Miami in the first place, that his cruelty had taught her to value herself properly, that his inability to see her worth had freed her to find someone who did. She hoped he realized that she hadn't transformed herself to spite him or prove him wrong. She'd simply become who she was always meant to be, and found a partner who celebrated that person instead of trying to diminish her. The wedding itself was small and elegant, held at sunset on a private beach with only their closest associates and genuine friends in attendance. Isabella wore a simple white gown that cost more than her first car, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist, her smile genuine and radiant. Dominic looked devastating in a custom tuxedo, his usual control visibly strained by emotion as he watched her walk toward him across the sand. "You're beautiful," he said when she reached him, his voice rough with feeling. "Absolutely beautiful." "You clean up well yourself," Isabella replied, her smile widening. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows focused on partnership and trust and choosing each other every day despite all the reasons they shouldn't. When the officiant finally pronounced them married, Dominic kissed her with the same possessive certainty he'd shown that night at the gala months ago, claiming her publicly, announcing to everyone watching that Isabella Cruz was now Isabella Vale, his wife in every legal and emotional sense. The reception was equally intimate, good food and better wine shared with people who genuinely cared about their happiness. Marcus made a surprisingly emotional toast about watching Dominic finally find someone worthy of his trust. Sarah from the office got tipsy and told embarrassing stories about the bets that had circulated regarding how long it would take them to admit their feelings. Dominic's attorney gave a speech about the legal advantages of their union that was deeply unromantic but practically valuable. And through it all, Isabella felt nothing but joy and certainty and absolute rightness about the choice she'd made. This was her future now, building an empire with the man she loved, navigating complications together, creating something lasting and meaningful from the unlikely foundation they'd established. Later, after the guests had departed and they were finally alone in the penthouse that was now officially their shared home, Dominic pulled Isabella close and just held her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking this chance on me, for seeing past what I was and believing in what we could become together. Thank you for being brave enough to change, for choosing a different future even though it meant abandoning everything you'd built." Isabella looked up at him, seeing her entire world reflected in his dark eyes. "We're going to do extraordinary things together, Dominic Vale. Build an empire that lasts, create a legacy that matters, live a life worth living instead of just surviving." "I believe you," Dominic said simply. "I believe in us." And in that moment, with Miami glittering beyond their windows and their future spreading out before them full of possibility and challenge and absolute certainty, Isabella believed it too. They were partners in every sense that mattered, equals building something extraordinary together, facing whatever came with unwavering trust in each other and themselves. The transformation that began with a kiss at a charity gala was complete. Isabella Cruz had evolved from a broken woman trying to prove her worth into Isabella Vale, partner to one of Miami's most powerful men and architect of her own extraordinary future. She'd learned that real strength wasn't about being harder or colder or more isolated. It was about being brave enough to choose love despite its risks, wise enough to demand partnership instead of protection, and confident enough to know her own value regardless of anyone else's opinion. And Dominic had learned that true power wasn't measured in fear or control or the ability to destroy enemies. It was measured in the strength to change, the courage to build something lasting, and the wisdom to recognize when someone extraordinary walked into your life and offered you a future you'd stopped believing was possible. Together, they were building something far greater than either could have achieved alone. An empire transitioning from criminal enterprise to legitimate dynasty. A partnership based on mutual respect and absolute trust. A love that had survived scrutiny and threats, and the complicated realities of their dangerous world. 3 years after Julian Wolfe had told Isabella she wasn't enough for his world, she stood in her own penthouse overlooking her own city beside a man who thought she was everything. Not despite her sharp edges and ambition and refusal to be diminished, but because of them. Not as decoration or accessory or someone to be protected from reality, but as a true partner whose strength and intelligence made their combined power exponentially greater. The revenge Isabella had enacted wasn't about making Julian regret losing her, though he surely did. It was about proving to herself that his judgment had been worthless, his limitations had been his own, and her worth had never been determined by his inability to recognize it. She'd built a life so full and rich and genuine that Julian's opinion had become completely irrelevant, not because she'd forgotten him, but because she'd transcended the entire framework of thinking that had once made his approval seem important. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not proving him wrong, but making him irrelevant. Not seeking revenge, but building transformation. Not surviving what he'd done to her, but thriving so completely that his cruelty became nothing more than a catalyst that had sent her towards something infinitely better. Isabella and Dominic stood together at their windows, watching their city breathe and shimmer in the darkness. Their future uncertain, but faced together with absolute certainty in each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new obstacles to navigate, but they'd handle it all the same way they'd handled everything else. As partners, as equals, as two people who'd chosen each other completely and were building something extraordinary from that choice. The story that began with a woman broken by rejection and a man isolated by power had transformed into something far more profound, a partnership that was reshaping an empire, a love that was redefining what strength actually meant, a future being built one deliberate choice at a time by two people brave enough to believe they deserved it. And as Isabella leaned against Dominic's solid warmth, his ring on her finger and his arms around her waist, she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. Not because someone else had chosen her, but because she'd chosen herself first, and in doing so, had become strong enough to choose a partner who truly deserved her. The past was closed. The future was open. And Isabella Vale, formerly Cruz, formerly broken, now whole, stood ready to face whatever came next with the man she loved beside her and the strength she'd built within herself sustaining them both. This wasn't the ending of her story. It was the beginning of everything she'd been building toward since the moment she decided that Julian Wolfe's judgment meant nothing compared to her own. The beginning of a partnership that would reshape Miami's power structure. The beginning of a love that would withstand every test thrown at it. The beginning of a future so extraordinary that 3 years ago, standing in the ruins of her relationship with Julian, she couldn't have imagined it was possible. But it was possible. It was real. And it was entirely, absolutely, perfectly hers.